Hey everyone, it's TechStrong TV. I'm Alan Schimmel. Welcome to the show. Today is Tuesday, November 17th. Man, we're cruising through. We're a week before Thanksgiving, a week out from Thanksgiving here in the U.S. Unfortunately, COVID numbers are going through the roof. 10,000 today just here in Florida, or yesterday just here in Florida, and we're edging up towards 200,000 cases in the U.S. a day, 1,500 dead a day. It's terrible. The good news is we've got two, looks like highly effective vaccines in the pipeline, and they can't get out there soon enough for people. It's important you stay strong, stay diligent. Don't let this fatigue take you out of this right before the end game, right before the end zone. So good luck to you all, but please stay safe. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay socially distanced. We've got a good show for you to watch today while you're home alone. We've got Dan Garfield from CodeFresh, and they just launched something called GitOps 2.0, which I think is going to be pretty amazing. GitOps, Weaveworks originally started it. Cornelia Davis and the gang there, and just great stuff going on. So Dan's going to tell us about GitOps 2.0. Then we have William Morgan, the CEO of Buoyant. Buoyant, of course, were the people behind Linkerd. It's now part of CNCF. Buoyant still remains, is a large contributor of code and keeper of the flame there. William's going to tell us about what to expect in this new version of Linkerd, which is 2.9. Then we have a Devops Unbound roundtable. This is a roundtable run that we did back, I want to say in August or September. It's how to coordinate all the elements of DevOps, of enterprise DevOps, with different cultures, application stacks, compliance requirements, etc. It was open to a live audience with questions. I think you're really going to like it. And if you like that kind of stuff, we have a Devops Unbound roundtable coming up live this week. If you check on devops.com/webinars, and you could sign up for that and participate in that one with us. So we'd love to have you on there. After that, though, we're going to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, chief content officer. Charlene has the news as well as a webinar preview of what we've got in store this week, news around the MediaOps site, and an interview with Guy Escanot of Bridge Crew. Guy's VP of product there, and Charlene's going to talk with him about security challenges and risks associated with infrastructure as code. After that, we're going to go over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch, where Mitch has an interview with Mark Smalley of Smalley IT, lead editor with Axelos of the IDLE 4 High Velocity. They join Mitch to discuss what's in IDLE 4. Great discussion. Check that out. And then we have a double barrel of the channel roundup with Mike Vizard today. Mike's first guest is AppDynamic and Thousand Eye. Chief Product Officer is Vipul Shah from Thousand Eyes, and Joe Vaccaro, head of product. Excuse me, I got that mixed up. Joe Vaccaro is head of product at Thousand Eyes. Vipul Shah is Chief Product Officer at AppDynamic. So do check that one. And then Mike also has a great interview with the folks at Portworx. Michael Ferranti, Vice President of Product and Corporate Marketing for Portworx. So thank you, Mike, for that. And then I'll be back to close things up. Just another great day here in the neighborhood for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our first guest. Up first today is my friend Dan Garfield from CodeFresh. I feel like CodeFresh has grown up right before our eyes here on TechStrong TV. Today they launched GitOps 2.0. It's a major release for CodeFresh, but it's not just about CodeFresh. It's about everyone playing in the GitOps ecosystem. So here's my interview with Dan Garfield.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here. Another segment for TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment is my friend Dan Garfield, coming back to us from CodeFresh. Hey Dan, welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
You know, CodeFresh has been making a lot of noise lately, a lot of waves in the market, and that's good. It's good for a couple of reasons, but one of them is we get to see you and hear more. So thanks for joining us. What's the big news at CodeFresh to share with us, Dan?
So the big news that we just came out with was the launch of GitOps 2.0, which is essentially a standard and also some tooling that is aimed at mainstreaming GitOps and making it the de facto deployment method, which is sort of the trend that we've been seeing with cloud native deployments, especially. So we really want to solve a lot of the issues that have existed in GitOps today with this new release.
Absolutely. And you know, so Dan, GitOps is GitOps as a concept is something that I think our audience is really familiar with. I think GitOps as a practice is something that has been maybe a little bit balkanized by some of the CI/CD players, and not just the CI/CD players, mind you. The testing people who are building testing into the Git kind of stage, security folks, observability, right? All of it is people are focusing because Git's where the action is, right? So when we talk about GitOps, you know, there's this overarching anything that takes place while code or an app is in Git is GitOps, right? And you can't argue with that. But when you talk about GitOps, what do you mean?
Well, so GitOps is really the goal of it is that you will have definitions and configuration defined in Git, and that the way that your applications run and your infrastructure runs should tend to coincide with that. And so the questions that have existed around GitOps have traditionally been, how do I handle secrets? How do I handle rollups between multiple environments? Do I need to have 1,000 Git repos, one for every environment that I'm managing, or is there another way to do it? And one of the biggest issues has actually been around observability. So people don't necessarily see what's happening, where it's happening. You can see what's in Git. You have an expectation that that's reflected in production, but maybe there's not a clear line between that. And it also doesn't account for the other parts of the development process. Like we have Jira tickets that are getting solved. There are pull requests we're dealing with. So what we really wanted to do is with GitOps 2.0, we're really looking forward to let's engage with the community. Let's try to figure out what these standards should be. Let's try to make sure that we have really good, robust best practices, very easy and repeatable patterns that are going to work well for everybody, and a well-worn path that's easy to follow. And so we're releasing the first components of that on the CodeFresh platform, which are essentially around observability. So the ability to see what's happening across multiple environments, multiple applications, what's being deployed, what Jira tickets have been released now, what pull requests are we dealing with, and to bring that all into a clear, focused view so that your development process, your deployment process is straightforward, it's reliable, it's fast. And this actually started internally. We had this at CodeFresh where maybe we would release a regression and people would get on Slack and start shouting, hey, who's been deploying stuff? What's going on? And that really drove us to sharpen our product around GitOps, because what we could do is essentially float all of this information up, because we're aware of the builds, we're aware of the commits, we're aware of the Jira tickets, we're aware of the deployments, all the environments. And so now if there was an issue, instead of just blowing up Slack, we could actually just go in and see, oh, here's where the issue's happening. Here's the release that was just done. I can go and do a rollback, or I know exactly what commits were in there. I know exactly where this regression comes from. And that's actually a huge part of what keeps people from deploying more often, because they don't have confidence that they can actually identify very, very quickly where a potential issue would arise, in addition to just making sure that the automation takes care of as many issues as possible before the release happens. So in order for people to deploy faster and more frequently and to be more successful, they have to have also not only the automation, but the confidence and the visibility in the entire process.
Absolutely. And in my mind, here's the real bottom line. It's got to live somewhere, right? It can't live in some ether kind of thing, right? It's got to live somewhere. Git's the place for it to live. Got to ask a business question, though, for you on that, though. So when we look at the rise of GitOps and now GitOps 2.0 from CodeFresh, does it inherently give the GitHubs and GitLabs a leg up on a CodeFresh, let's say? Or does CodeFresh, I don't care what Git you use, we work fine in it, right? And underlying both GitHub, GitLab, and every other Git something out there is Git itself, which is the same Git open source that's been available now for, I think it's 15 years. Maybe it's 10, but whatever.
So the Git providers in some ways do benefit from the GitOps movement, but really what we're looking at is the process of how that software is released and deployed. And that always entails automation. And that's where CodeFresh shines, right? We are a DevOps automation platform designed for Kubernetes, designed for cloud native applications. And so this is where a lot of the rubber meets the road. And to give you an example of a typical workflow, this is a pattern that we're promoting and one that we see our customers using quite frequently, is they will check in code to an application repo. This will fire off a CodeFresh pipeline, which will generate and modify the actual manifests that need to be deployed into Kubernetes or potentially serverless or whatever. And then the automation actually opens up the pull request onto the repo where the infrastructure configuration is stored. And that triggers, again, a testing process that goes through and does deployment. And then once you deploy something, you have to be able to test it. So that means you need automation, right? So again, you're back into your DevOps platform that's performing that, your CICD platform. And then finally, the pull request is merged, potentially automatically, sometimes manually, sometimes there's approval processes. And then, of course, the deployment happens directly. And then everything is tracked and put into a dashboard where you can see exactly what's going on, what's deployed, what Jira issues were on it, what pull requests were on it, how many committers. And sometimes even if you squash a commit, you'll be able to see all that data and information across, the application and the infrastructure. So there is a benefit to the Git providers, but it's not like there was any system under which we weren't going to cement Git or the source code management as critical in the process. It has to be. And actually, it's really great for us because we're Git agnostic. We're cloud agnostic. So we're thrilled. Hey, you want to use GitHub? You want to use GitLab? You want to use Bitbucket? Great. We integrate beautifully with all these things. We're going to go and integrate with all the clouds in the same way. So I don't think that there's some sort of competition. There's really a strong cooperation between the source code and the automation platforms.
Agreed. I think another thing that you touched on it a bit, but I want to make clear to our audience is, we think of GitOps, we think of almost just that pre-deployment aspect, right? Because when we go from that left to right continuum, GitOps is to the left of deployment. But part of GitOps is, hey, this stuff lives here, but the feedback loops that, come from post-deployment observability or, monitoring, feedback into that body of knowledge, if you will, or information in Git. And it's that, it's the circle of life kind of thing that it helps us in our next deployments because it is a continuous environment, right? So for my ops friends out here, my SRE folks out here, they hear GitOps, they shouldn't just shut off. Oh, this has nothing to do with me or whatever it does.
No,
right? It makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually a confusion oftentimes that GitOps is only for infrastructure management. And that's not really the case. It's definitely for application, deployment management. And it's very, very powerful. Once you start doing it, you realize how effective it is. And it actually enforces really good hygiene within the organization. I heard someone one time tell me, well, I don't want to automatically deploy. I don't want to deploy what's in my master branch because I want to check it before I deploy it. What that reveals is that you weren't checking it before it was merged.
Yeah.
that's when you're supposed to check it, right? So
Yeah.
once it goes into that branch, we should view it as ready to go. And so it's not just about the technology being effective. It's also about enforcing good practices, good cultural habits, and good hygiene within the organization. And if the tools enforce that and they reinforce that, that really helps the organization move along and move forward. And the number one way that we see this roll out is typically you have kind of a forward-thinking team within an organization. They're using Kubernetes, they're using kind of the latest technologies, and they'll adopt this GitOps best practice. They'll adopt this pattern. And what will happen invariably is that within the organization, people start to notice that that team is shipping code faster. They're shipping more code faster. And so they start to ask, why are they able to do that? How does that work? And of course, it becomes the reference architecture that then spreads within the organization. And this is what's happened typically with our customer base. So that reference architecture is really the key because it's really performance based. This isn't a hey, let me convince you that it's important. It's a try and see, right? You'll see it, you'll see the effect, and that decides the rest. So shutting off just because you heard the word GitOps, what it really means is that you're silencing off the future possibilities, right? It's a bit like the accounting houses who decided that Lotus 123, the accounting software spreadsheets, was going to put them out of business, so they ignored it. Well, they were right. It did put them out of business because they didn't implement.
Because they did ignore it.
Exactly.
And that's why. But yeah, you're 100% correct. And that's what I was trying to get at it. You said it better than me, Dan. So, there's some folks out here who hear, GitOps 2.0. Oh, no, not another 2.0. We've heard Web 2.0, this 2.0, that 2.0. And what I want to make clear, this is an evolution of GitOps, right? As it continues to mature and becomes more powerful, we're not necessarily throwing out the old to bring in the new. We're building on what's been built, what has been building over these last months, years, because now there's even more possible, right? There's more possibilities.
That's right. GitOps at this point is really a movement. And Weaveworks, of course, deserves all the credit in the world for starting this and fostering it. And now we have these next-gen deployment operators like Argo and Flux. And the toolkits are really getting powerful. And what we're really trying to do is say, okay, customers have been adopting it. So how do we make this something that's more mainstream? How do we take it forward? And really, it's solving some of those critical issues of scale, right? If I want to do GitOps at scale, how do I know what's going on if I have 5,000 different services that are being deployed? That's where we're really aiming to solve problems right now with our new offering. And at the same time, it's also providing a well-lit path and saying, these are the patterns, these are the methods, these are the strategies that we want to follow. And that's something that we don't think is going to come from us. We're engaging with the community. We're engaging with the companies that are involved with pushing GitOps. We're engaging to really try to come together around these standards and best practices, because we think that if we can do that, we can go so much farther together than we would alone.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about scalability, enterprise, and stuff like that. I mean, I think that maybe it's taken for granted, but people need to recognize that because this is in essence running within Git, which is, over the last 10 plus years, proven to be pretty damn scalable, right? So you start with that real scalable enterprise kind of base, and now we build these things on it. And yes, that is evolution 2.0. We spoke about it, right? Things will continue to get better. Part of that being better is being more scalable, being more polished. This is ready for primetime enterprises at this point. Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing enterprises begin to adopt it, and really, what you saw with GitOps over the last few years was these really powerful kind of best practices starting to emerge. And so now it's just making them scale and work for the enterprise. And that's why we picked observability as the first area that we wanted to focus on. to be clear, we're not thinking, hey, we're launching GitOps 2.0 all fully baked as a standard today. What we are doing is we're launching the first components of what we view as critical in a GitOps 2.0 world. And so, yes, the enterprise is adopting it. They're having success, and we expect that that's going to rapidly roll out across the industry. More and more people will be adopting it and moving quickly because there's such a big advantage to doing so.
Sure. Now, Dan, 2.0 or this next, GitOps sort of evolutionary state, whatever people want to call it, we should make clear it's not just you guys alone, right? This is meant for the industry to sort of gel around, gather around. What, if anything, what kind of support are you seeing?
So I hopefully will be announcing some very concrete things very soon that we've been working on. We've been talking to customers, we've been talking to industry companies, we've been talking to those who are involved in GitOps today and those who want to be engaged in it. And really, I think our goal is to come together to define the standards, the views, the best practices, and promote the standard and bring it more mainstream because there's so much value in it. And similar to the CNCF, in the CNCF, you have a lot of companies who are competing with each other, but ultimately they know that they're going to be much more successful by growing the pie than by trying to divide it up. And that's where we're at in the community. We're saying, let's work together. Let's push this stuff forward. The pie can grow so much larger because there's so much value in the industry to be done. So really the incentives are aligned very nicely for a strong community cooperation.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I got to assume that that's another shoe that's going to drop here, right? But look, a good reason to have you back on soon. So
that's right.
We'll mark that down for a reason to come back. Dan, we only got a few moments here left. For people who want to find out more information, really dig into this, where can we send them? Yeah,
go to codefresh.io. There's a big masthead right now talking about GitOps 2.0. You can learn more about the standard we're promoting. You can learn more about the tools that we've just released and read case studies and quotes from people who have been using it as part of our beta program. Very cool. Besides GitOps 2.0, any other CodeFresh news since the last time we spoke with you? Well, we're certainly growing very quickly, and that's always exciting. It's been a real exciting experience for me as someone who's been in a number of startups. And of course, I worked in some large enterprises previously, but to see just the company double. And I mean, it's amazing to sit in a room full of people that seems like 5 minutes ago, I knew everybody by name. And now I'm seeing people who apparently have worked here for a few months I've never even seen before. So it's an exciting time to be at CodeFresh. Yeah. And we are recruiting heavily and hiring. And so I would make a plug for that. We would love to have more excited, engaged people, industry people at CodeFresh. Absolutely. They could go to codefresh.io and look at, is there a listing for open recs or anything? Yep. Yeah. Check out our careers page there. Very cool. We see it here. I mean, so we're not in the software. We don't create our own software. We're a media company. But we had a crazy year ourselves. Now, as the CEO, I do get to meet everyone we hire at some point, right? I hope, unless there's people on there, I don't know. But what's interesting is a lot of these people, and we've probably almost doubled the head count this year. Wow. There are a lot of people I've never met in person, Dan, right? Which kind of gets me a little freaked out sometimes. Like, yeah, this person's become like a real contributor here in the company, but I see them on Zoom because we do a Zoom call every day just to say hello to everyone and get us. So I see them on Zoom. I know what their head looks like. I have no idea what their body looks like, and I've never met them in person. It's a very weird kind of. It's 2020, right? Oh, it's bizarre. When you do see these people in person, the first thing you notice is that you've made assumptions about how tall people are. And it's always just dramatically different than what you would have expected. And of course, I actually was met up in person with somebody last week that I hadn't seen in a long time, except we just have Zooms all the time. So I'm very, very familiar with them, very comfortable. And of course, once you actually get in the room, it's like, oh, you're a different height than.
Right. You don't look like your Zoom does, but
on Zoom, we're all the same height.
Exactly. We're all sitting here doing it. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, hey, Dan, thanks for joining us. Congratulations with this GitOps 2.0. We'll be watching how this develops and industry support gels around it. Come back and see us soon. Keep us posted. All right.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Dan Garfield, Code Fresh here on TechStrong TV. Hey, we're going to take a quick break and be back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Of course, is managed by CNCF, but the folks at Buoyant were really behind it, prior to taking it to the CNCF, and they still are part of the core team that maintains Buoyant, that maintains Linkerd, and this new version 2.9 that just came out, it has a lot of their doing. The service mesh space in Kubernetes is crowded. I don't know if it's crowded, but there's certainly more than one solution. But William's going to explain to us, how do you pick the right mesh solution, service mesh solution for your needs, as well as what's happening with Linkerd and 2.9. So here's William Morgan, CEO of Buoyant.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. For this segment, I'm actually joined by William Morgan, who's CTO of Buoyant, and we are going to be talking about news around Linkerd, the popular service mesh open source project, part of CNCF. William, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
Absolutely is. So, William, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but I gave them your name, your title, the company. Mentioned Linkerd, but you could do better than that. Give our audience a little background.
Sure. So, like Alan said, I'm CEO of a company called Buoyant. We're we are the creator, and we're the one of the sponsors of Linkerd today. Linkerd, of course, is a CNCF project. It's a service mesh. It's for Kubernetes. It's the fastest, lightest, best service mesh, in my opinion, 100% open source. I guess I call myself a Linkerd maintainer, but in reality, I maintain the README file, and that's about it. Mostly I'm like the beautiful face of the project.
Sort of like I'm the beautiful face of TechStrong TV, but okay. But you laugh. So someone who's been, looking at open source projects for way longer than there was a CNCF or anything like that, that README file is very, very, very important, William. Right? I always start at the README file to kind of get the lay of the land, and there's usually a little history in there, and then everything else. So, no offense to anybody who's maintaining README files or projects out there. We're a diverse bunch. But anyway, William, the big news this week, we've got a new release of Linkerd coming out, yeah?
That's right, 2.9, already up to 2.9. Yeah.
It's crazy when you think about it. When did you guys first, when was 1.0 of Linkerd? Do you remember?
Yeah, so 1.0, gosh, was back in, must have been 2017 or something like that. Maybe, because, Linkerd was one of the earliest CNCF projects. I think we were like the 5th project to enter the CNCF after, Kubernetes and Prometheus and like all these kind of, really well-known projects. And after that, and that was in early 2017, I think we did 1.0 after that. And Linkerd actually has gone through this a huge transformation from 1.0 to 2.0, which happened about a year and a half later, where all of the 1.x releases, which are still running out there and powering like huge systems, were written on the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine. They were using what we call the Twitter stack because there was a lot of Twitter open source technology. And then in the 2.x branch, we actually removed all of that stuff entirely and rewrote it from the ground up. So the control plane now is written in Go, kind of fits very tightly into the Kubernetes ecosystem. And the data plane is actually written in Rust. We have this tiny little micro proxy just called Linkerd 2 proxy.
Really, very cool. So, William, look, as I mentioned at the top, Linkerd is no stranger to our audience. CNCF is certainly no stranger to the audience. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the company Buoyant, though. And, I'd like you to give a little background on that. But here's the angle, if you don't mind, I'd like you to kind of go with it, which is, I don't know if a lot of people understand the relationship when a commercial entity such as a Buoyant, and it gives birth, if you will, to an open source project like Linkerd, and then donates it. It's like putting your child up, to an organization like the CNCF, but you still maintain a special relationship with the project, obviously. And how does that affect the day-to-day of Buoyant? And a lot of companies get schizophrenic because what's there outside of Linkerd? What is the Buoyant identity, right? So if you can tackle that head on.
This is a very nuanced topic, and it's something that has evolved over years. What is the relationship between kind of corporate entities and open source? At Buoyant, we've kind of stayed a little bit behind the scenes. Especially the past couple of years, we've been focused very, very heavily on open source adoption. So pretty much everything we're doing, we're putting into Linkerd, trying to make that the best possible project. We're not holding anything back at all. And we're taking we're letting the limelight shine on Linkerd. But obviously Buoyant is a company and needs to make money, and that's good for the project as well, because that means that that Linkerd continues getting kind of all the the good stuff that we that we put into it. So we're taking a very particular approach. I think historically there's been these different models for how does a company relate to an open source project. There's the early services only model of companies like Red Hat. Then there was a wave of these open core strategies where you would have like a open source Linkerd, but maybe we'd have a Linkerd enterprise proprietary version that had some extra features in it. And we considered that for a while, but actually I don't really like that model. I think it's hard to get right. And it's very easy for you to end up in a situation where you're kind of at odds with the open source community, right? Of course you want them to adopt it, but you also don't want them to adopt it so much that they won't pay you money. So you have to do this continuous dance of these features are going to be proprietary and these ones are going to be open source. And then, it's just a difficult balance to maintain, especially since, your open source adopters and your customers, you don't want to treat them as two separate audiences and where you have to fight, kind of between them. So instead, what we do is with Linkerd, we put everything in the open source. We say, hey, you know what? This is got to be a first-class, production-ready, enterprise-ready project just from open source. And then what we do at Buoyant is two things. I guess three things if you include sponsoring all the Linkerd development, or the majority of it. The first is we just we provide commercial support. So if you are adopting Linkerd and you need a neck to strangle, when things go wrong, right? You need someone to wake up at 3 a.m. and help you fix this thing, then you can pay us and we can have these commercial SLAs on top of that. That's not a huge, kind of revenue, scalable revenue source or whatever for us. It's something that we do because it's right for Linkerd and because companies need it, right? Like there are a lot of companies that just need to have that relationship in order to successfully adopt any kind of open source. But most of what we do is we actually put our time and energy into building products, commercial products that sit on top of the service mesh, right? So these are things where, okay, once you have the service mesh in play, now, there's this other set of challenges that actually can be really well addressed by having a SaaS product that allows you to combine multiple clusters and things like that. So that's a very long-winded answer to what is the relationship between Buoyant.
No, I was looking for a long-winded answer. It's good. Because you know what? Well, I don't want to get into politics, but for too many things, everyone thinks there's a simple answer to hard questions. And sometimes there aren't simple answers to hard questions, right? It's a nuanced, serious question, and it's not something you can just say, oh yeah, no, it's an arm's length or whatever. So I appreciate you taking the time going into that. William, let's talk about 2.9 release though. What's the highlights for you here?
Yeah, so the big kind of news with 2.9 is around this idea of mutual TLS. So that's a concept that is basically allows your services within your cluster to talk to each other in a way that is not just encrypted, so it's confidential from like eavesdroppers, but is also authenticated on both sides. So everyone knows I am service A, you're service B. I can kind of like cryptographically verify that, and that communication is encrypted. And in 2.9, we extended that to all TCP connections. So previous releases, we had this for HTTP and gRPC connections. Now we've extended it to all TCP connections. And kind of the magic there for Linkerd is that we do all of this. It's hard to do, right? There's like certificate management. There's
I was going to say, it's all about their certificates.
Yeah, it's non-trivial, but we do it all by default. It's turned on and with zero config. So the moment you add Linkerd to your system, all communication, all TCP communication between meshed endpoints is actually protected by these really strong cryptographic guarantees of confidentiality and authenticity. Amazing.
That's great. Yeah. Well, again, simple answers to hard questions. People just want to know, oh, everything's encrypted.
Yeah.
But when you really start getting into what does it take to do that encryption, the level of complexity, the level of technology, one of the companies, we deal with a bunch of different companies in the certificate space here and our media ops. And I know how, in an age where every single instance of every Kubernetes instance, of every server, of every machine identity, there's many more machine identities than there are people identities. Not to say that people don't need identities. And so this whole certificate game or industry or is real, and it's not trivial.
And what's interesting, I think, especially around security, is that complexity is the enemy of security, right? The more complex something is, because there's humans involved, right? Because the more complex something is, the more ways there are for you to mess it up, and the harder it is to use, and that means you just don't end up using it. So, that we focus on simplicity.
I've been in security 20 years, right, William? And I think when security is at its best, we make it look simple to the users, to the end users and the users. It's just auto magic. It's auto magic. It works. It's secure.
Right.
They don't want to know what goes in to making sure that certificates talk to each other well and you got all that. They just want to know it works. Right?
Yeah.
No security guy ever gets a pat on the back because we didn't have a breach today or we didn't have a security incident today. No one ever says, oh, great job. We got through the day. Something happens, they hear about it. And that's the life of a security person. What are you going to do?
You only get yelled at. You never get rewarded.
Exactly. Because no one knows when Anyway, what else do we have in 2.9?
Yeah, so a couple other cool things. One is Linkerd now supports ARM architecture. So that means you can run Linkerd on not only your Raspberry Pis if you want, but also, AWS has Graviton, which ostensibly has significantly lower costs, operating costs and things like that. So now you have an opportunity to see just how much money you'll save. We've extended Linkerd's kind of Kubernetes integration to allow support for service topologies, which give you a way of saying, hey, these requests that you're making from A to B, try and keep them in the same node, or try and keep them in the same region, either for latency reasons or for cost savings reasons, right? Cross-zone traffic is expensive. And kind of under the hood, one thing we've done is, I alluded to this earlier, we have this tiny proxy called Linkerd2 proxy that's written in Rust. It's extremely lightweight, extremely small, and focused on, just the service mesh sidecar use case, which is part of the reason why Linkerd has such a small memory footprint and such a small latency impact compared to other service meshes. But we've extended that to a new multi-core runtime, so it can now handle extremely large volumes of traffic to a single pod. So lots of good changes under the hood. We've also made things faster, while doing that. So, yeah, it's a pretty good release.
Excellent, man. That is great. We should mention, you said, you mentioned other service meshes, and I'm not here to bash or praise any of them, but
I'll do it.
Okay, have at it. But no, seriously, usually in these kinds of market situations, you have multiple contenders because no one of them is just killing it, right? Because eventually one becomes dominant in Kubernetes, right? There was a time 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe, where there were people making bets on different container orchestrators, right? You had Docker Swarm and you had Kubernetes, but you had others. You had their D2IQ Mesio,
yeah, Mesos,
right?
Yeah.
You Mesosphere. You had Rancher, right? They all support Kubernetes now, but back then, everybody was saying, okay, what's going to be there? Seem to be in a similar place in service mesh, but we've been in this place now for a couple of years, quite frankly.
So I'll tell you my opinion, which is that I actually think Kubernetes was a little special. I think the fact that it rose to dominance so rapidly was unique. And I think in most open source ecosystems, if you look at them, I think having multiple players is kind of more normal, and it only feels weird for us because we've just gone through this very public Kubernetes kind of rise. So as much as I'd like to say Linkerd is going to be the one that defeats everyone else, I think in practice we're going to have a couple, probably not the 12 that are out there today, or whatever it is, including multiple service meshes from the same company, which always kind of blows my mind. I will name no names.
Which will remain nameless, Greg.
But I think it will get consolidated.
Got a lot of different icons now too, but go ahead.
Right. I think it'll get consolidated, not into one, but into probably two or three.
Well, I think you could wind up with something similar to our public cloud kind of landscape today, where look, they're all viable, and each one does something special. They each have their own specialty, where if you're looking to do this, that's the right one for that. If you want to do that, this is the right one. I think we might wind up, in a similar situation in service mesh. What do you think would be Linkerd's kind of special sauce or specialty?
Yeah, so certainly I get asked this question a lot, how does it compare to these other ones, especially since there's service meshes like Istio, to name names, that have a huge amount of marketing kind of push behind them, that we can't really outshout. So the way I think about it is, the goals of these projects are pretty similar. There's a set of features around reliability. There's a set of features around observability. There's a set of features around security. But the way they implement those is very, very different. And with Linkerd, what we've done, we've taken this very specific and particular approach, which is we want to do the least amount possible. We want to make this the smallest, thinnest, and most importantly, simplest service mesh. And so I actually don't want to have the giant feature checklist. I want to do like the least, because you've just adopted Kubernetes, and man, that thing is huge, right? And like, you can't then layer on another giant blob of technology and complexity and end up in a good place. So everything we do with Linkerd is around not just speed and security, but around simplicity. How do we make this so you, as the operator of this service mesh, you understand what's going on, you have a model, in your brain for how things work that you can reason about, and you have the tools to not just get the value out of the service mesh, but to actually understand, hey, the service mesh itself it's working, or like, oh, it's failing over here, right? Like that kind of introspectability is crucial for anyone who actually has to operate these things in production.
I agree with you. I think if I had to pick one feature that I'd want to, strive for, it would be simplicity. I think, and again, I'm not as involved in it as you are, obviously, but as an observer of the market, I love going to KubeCons. I loved going to DockerCons, but I come home every time and just say it's still too hard. It's still too hard for a good chunk of the audience who needs to use this. And my first kind of exposure to the service mesh kind of contenders, whatever you want to call them, was probably KubeCon in Seattle 3 years ago, right?
4 years ago, yeah, because it was on election
and
night.
Yeah, fun times. Please don't remind me. Anyway, but we go back, and I remember coming, among other thoughts, thinking to myself, this service mesh has a lot of promise, but Jesus, there's a lot of work that needs to get done here, because this thing is just so raw, right? And subsequent years, when I check in on it, it has service mesh in general, not just Linkerd, has come a long way. But I don't know if it's really gotten a lot simpler in a lot of these iterations.
Yeah, this is honestly what is frustrating to me on the Linkerd project, is so many people have.
And I'm just being honest. Don't hold it against
me. No. Like you and a lot of other people, you associate service mesh with complexity, and it's because there are these very complex projects out there. And I understand how they got complex, right? Like, first of all, it's really hard to make things simple, and second of all, as an infrastructure engineer, I think you kind of have this desire to like build these amazing platforms where like we're going to do everything for all people, and we're going to add that feature and that feature, and like it's all part of the platform, man. Like we're going to take over the world. And it takes a lot of discipline to do the opposite and to say, actually, we don't want to do that. Linkerd, for example, doesn't have an ingress controller, right? Like, because that's something that is out there. It's, there's a million ingress controllers. Why should we take on that functionality? We want to do less. So it requires that kind of discipline, which is hard to do. And I think it also requires having a lot of empathy for our end users, because you have to see this through their eyes, right? They're the poor souls who have to like jam this thing in, and then when it goes wrong, or when something goes wrong, they're going to get yelled at, and then they have to like defend like why they did this. Like we see this over and over and over again. So having those two, having that empathy and having that discipline is what has allowed us to, and like I say this, like I have it, obviously I have no discipline whatsoever, but the engineers who are actually building Linkerd, like that's what allows them to actually make this service mesh so different from the other ones.
Absolutely. Hey, William, we're over time, but I want to just, for anyone who wants to get more information on version 2.9 of Linkerd, should they go to like GitHub for this, or
you could go straight to Linkerd? Yeah, straight to linkerd.io, and you'll get all of the scoop on there. And then if you're interested in checking out any of the cool things that Buoyant is building on top of Linkerd, we have something called Buoyant Cloud. So go to buoyant.io, and you will get an eye full of exciting, cool stuff there too.
We have to have you back on, and we should just talk about Buoyant, I think.
Let's do that.
Because we didn't. You know what? It's on you.
Okay, great. We'll do
Let's
it.
do it. All right. Hey, William Morgan, founder Buoyant, people behind, well, the original people behind Linkerd, one of the most popular CNCF projects. Version 2.9 is out. Check it out. William, thanks for coming by and talking with us today. We'll talk more soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. This is Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right. Up next, as I mentioned, we do, in addition to our Devops Unbound panels that we do every other week, once a month we do live roundtables with 6 to 8 participants, open to live questions from the audience. This was one of the ones we did about 2 months ago, and it's how to coordinating all the different elements of modern DevOps, beyond high-performing teams and across tool sets and cultures. How do we keep DevOps humming and moving forward? I hope you'll enjoy this one. It's Devops Unbound Roundtable. Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, CEO of MediaOps, editor-in-chief of Devops.com, and welcome to another great webinar. Today's webinar is actually a roundtable, which means that rather than a slideshow, which I think we've all seen enough slideshows over the last 9 months, this is more of a interactive panel discussion with some really great panel members, and also you, the audience, are part of this discussion, right? We've structured this where it's a very open flow conversation. We will be taking questions from the audience as we go. So I do encourage you to please participate, inquire, ask, comment, whatever you'd like. And I'm going to tell you how to do that in a second. Here on MediaOps for our webinars and roundtables, we do use the GoToWebinar system. And that means for most of you, you have a GoToWebinar control panel, probably in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you look at that control panel, you'll see that it's broken into several sections. 2 sections in particular that I wanted to call to your attention today. And the first one is the question section. So if you look at questions, and if you hit the little caret or arrow pointing down, you'll see the question section expand. You can type your question in there in real time. There's no need to wait until I ask or we ask for a question or a question period. You can type it in there. And the beautiful thing about it is it's queued chronologically in order of when they're asked. We can respond privately if it's not something that we're going to share with the whole audience. And we also have a record of the question if for some reason we have too many questions to answer today. We can get out to you on email after the fact with an answer to your question. We do believe strongly that every question deserves an answer, or at least an attempt at an answer. It may not be a good answer, but we'll try anyway. So please put your questions in there as they pop into your brain. The last reason to do it is if you're like me and you try to remember your question to the next minute, you're liable to forget it. So it's a good idea to get it in there while it's still fresh. The second part I want to get in is the chat section, which is at the very bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. Here on MediaOps, we use the chat section basically for tech support. So if for some reason the video isn't working, the audio has stopped working or is choppy or some other kind of issue like that, we do have folks standing by ready to try to help you get the most out of your webinar experience today. So if you go in chat, let us know what your problem is, any experiences, troublesome experience. We will try to address it for you. We do the best we can. Let me also state that today's roundtable is being recorded. It will be available on demand, probably within just a few hours after wrapping up today. So if you, whatever reason, if you have to pop in and pop out, you can catch this later as well. That being said, let's jump into today's roundtable, and it's going to be a great one, guys. So about a month and a half, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago maybe, we started a new series here on Media Ops and our Digital Anarchist, TechStrong TV, and it's called Devops Unbound. It explores different aspects of DevOps, and and that's every other week on TechStrong TV, and it's standalone on Digital Anarchist. As part of Devops Unbound, though, about once a month or once every 6 weeks, we do these roundtables that are open to the public, and we pick what we think are meaty topics that we can jump into, and we invite a cast of experts to talk about a particular subject. Today's subject is fitting SAP into a DevOps world. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but first, I'm going to introduce you to our audience, and I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves. If you're looking at the graphic I've thrown up here for you, let's go my left to right anyway, and I'm going to start by introducing Wolfgang Platz. Wolfgang is the founder CSO of Tricentis. I should mention Tricentis is a sponsor of Devops Unbound. Wolfgang, welcome. And do you want to just give a quick little background?
Yes, thanks, Alan, for the intro. My name is Wolfgang Platz, founder and chief strategy officer of Tricentis. I've been in the software testing space for very long, and now is good. Like 15 years ago, I started to grow more and more into the SAP world as well. So have seen both sides, so to say. Could be one side also. We're going to talk about DevOps and SAP today, and very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I'm Alan, obviously. Unfortunately, Shane McDonald from Onapsis was not able to make it today. He was a sort of last-minute scratch, so we're going to continue without him. Let me next go to Mitch Ashley, who's the CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I lead an analyst firm that focuses on digital transformation, cloud native, DevOps, cybersecurity, kind of the heart of a lot of the things that are happening now and into the future. So excited to be here with this great panel.
Thank you, Mitchell. Next, we have Ann Lewis, and for purposes of disclosure and to protect the innocent, and is a former director of quality assurance in a Fortune 10 energy company. And if you'd like to give anything else on your background, we're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So I have been in the SAP world, primarily with projects for the probably close to 20 years. And then probably close to 12 years working strictly in the quality engineering aspect of SAP and non-SAP. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ann. Next, we have Chris Truman. Chris is SVP Live Compare, Tricentis. Chris, you want to give a little background?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Hello, everyone. So my name is Chris Truman. I'm part of the products team here at Tricentis. My journey with SAP begins early 1990s, in fact, just after I left university, working to develop software for SAP. But the majority of my career has been all about focused on software development lifecycle and how we can bring tooling that is often quite common outside of SAP into the world of SAP.
So you're a newcomer to the SAP world.
I am a newcomer to the world of SAP.
All
Get
right.
ready.
And then, thank you, Chris. And then last but not least, we have Frank Sharpenberg, who's VP and head of SAP for Cognizant. Frank, a little background?
Yes, Alan. Hello, my name is Frank Sharpenberg. So I'm responsible for the SAP business in Cognizant here for Europe. And yeah, I'm totally on the provider side. So I'm a born natural SAP guy. So I had to learn the whole hard stuff around DevOps and Agile coming from the outside world to our SAP Cosmos. So, and I'm really excited on this discussion now and where we really are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, guys, I thought I would kick off the discussion today with this. I bet if we went back to the very first DevOps days that was held in Ghent, Belgium, and Patrick Dubois and some of the other folks that were there, and asked them, do you think DevOps has a place in an SAP shop, in an SAP world? I don't know if I would have their unanimous agreement that, yes, somehow DevOps would be part of an SAP engagement or an SAP practice in a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company. By the same token, I think up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if we asked most folks who were either as Frank on the provider side of it or as Ann on an actual user space, what role can DevOps play in my SAP practice? You might have been hard pressed to put your finger on it. Nevertheless, here we are, right? DevOps continues to evolve. SAP, I think one of the things about SAP is that though it's been around, as in Chris's case, in the 90s and before, the reason it is still what it is because it remains relevant by adapting, evolving into to utilize what's available, like any good product or a system should, right? And so, Ann, I'm going to ask you to kick off if you don't mind, because you really bring a practitioner's view to this of, what is your view of a place for DevOps at the SAP table or not? I mean, that's a valid point too. So Ann, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. So back in 2009, that's when we started looking at doing agile project development, okay, with SAP. And as I was going through the training, I did get a headache, but I also kind of thought of an analogy. And if anybody's had to take a driver's test or learn how to drive in another country, you have to unlearn how you drove in your home country in order to learn to drive in the new country. And it dawned on me that in order to do agile project management with SAP, you kind of have to unlearn how you used to do it in order to learn how to do agile with SAP. And as we went into the agile project management process, there were rough times, no doubt about it. But the one thing that stood out is you've got to have the people with an agility in their mindset, all right? And you also have to have, I'll say, a spectrum of people within that agile team, meaning you've got to have the business contacts in that agile team. You have to have the developers. And so we started realizing that this was a very different way of doing project. And we also had to learn how to think at the SAP sub-functional level, not at the finance level or the supply chain level. You had to start breaking it down into almost predecessor-successor relationships and focus on that and look at the little bits that could be fixed, changed, upgraded, or whatever we were doing. So I think it just in summary, you had to unlearn, you had to have people with an agile mindset, and you had to have business and IT sitting side by side.
I think that sums up what I've heard from others who've been down this road as well. It's in sync, but interested in other thoughts, comments on that from our panel here.
Yes, please, Chris, go ahead. You're the expert here.
I mean, for me, DevOps it's the latest and best mechanism we have for organizing our efforts to transform ideas into working software that we want to have run in production. So I don't know that SAP would have ever been something that people thinking of this methodology or way of developing would have said, oh, we are not going to include SAP in that. I do agree with Anne that because SAP has been around and then there is a change in the way that we want to organize ourselves to support that transformation of ideas, yes, I think the process of unlearning definitely resonates with me. But I don't think that because it's SAP, that naturally excludes any particular software development methodology, DevOps or otherwise.
Right.
If I can jump into Alan, I know it wasn't the reason why DevOps was initiated, kind of created, but in a way, projects like SAP projects are why we do things like Agile and DevOps. I was going to teasingly ask Anne, now, was that one SAP project you were on for 20 years, or was that more than one? You're infamously.
That's a low blow, Mitchell.
I'm sorry. I do that in all fun.
No, it's too early to have a headache. Sorry.
If you've been on an SAP or any kind of ERP implementation, those are multi-year projects, and they tend to start out as 2 years and go 4 and 5. And I think most people would back
and the dollars go with it.
And they go with it because you're touching so many parts of the business, and SAP is the kind of application you just don't install it, configure it, and go. You actually have to either map your business process to it or change your business process while you're digging into it. And that's part of the challenge, is how much do you change and make the project bigger. But my point is, DevOps, like Agile, is not about a technology. It's about how we create software. It's about how people team. But they're nice complements, because Agile breaks things up into sprints, which is why, Anne, as you mentioned about getting things to a lower level of granularity, because you have to do things in 2-3 week increments. Exactly. And DevOps, there's so much customization that goes along with SAP. You know, you're not customizing necessarily the core product, you are with the configuration of it, but there's a lot of software that gets created or adapted that either exists or new software in the process. So I think it's a perfect example of why you need something to help you make the problem more manageable.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
So, sorry for that low blow there, Anne.
Just to add on that, I see in the discussions that there is always a very string linkage between Agile and the DevOps part, right? And of course, there is. So if the more agile you want to be, the more you have to apply some DevOps principle. But a lot of discussions with our clients starts first with, we want to deploy more often, right? So let's say, so we have these typical fancy release cycles for changes once a year, or if they are good, 2 times a year, and we want to lower that. So we want to come down to, and then go on the roadmap, maybe quarterly, then monthly, and even go down maybe to weekly, and some say even submit some small changes on a daily basis. So this is very often the start point of a discussion. So what do I have to change? It's not always that I have to change the delivery method right from the beginning to say, now we always have to do all changes in agile mode. Yeah, there can even be some changes on a typical waterfall mode, but we want to cut them down into smaller release cycles and deploy changes and innovations, whatever, much more often. And for that, we need to rethink the way how we do development and operations, integrate teams, rethink processes, and of course, then look in the end then on the technology stack as well, who can enable us to deploy much more often and quicker in a much more automated and secure way.
You know, this brings up a lesson I learned early on when I founded Devops.com and had a chance to speak to many, and found this out listening to many people, which is, you know, the DevOps, each person's DevOps or each organization's DevOps experience is unique to them. If you're an organization that is on an annual release cycle, and you move to a biannual, twice a year cycle, you've made 100%, change to your release cycle. You went from 1 to 2 times a year. If you're at 1 times a year and you go to a quarterly cycle, you have a 400% change in your release cycle, and that's nothing to sneeze about. Now, others may say, "Well, I'm releasing 4 times an hour, and 4 times a year is ludicrous." But no, you get the DevOps you get is the DevOps you deserve. And if you go from 1 times a year to 4 times a year, that's progress, and that's, well, some may think of it as progress, but it is progress in that you are moving from 1 time a year to 4 times a year. And so we need to, what yardstick we judge by has to be unique to our own experiences. What's interesting, Ann, is you looked at the SAP and Agile piece of it, and I think as Frank and Mitchell and Chris mentioned, then we add sort of the DevOps on top of Agile, or in addition to Agile, or as part of Agile, and what does that bring to it? And Wolfgang, I'm interested in kind of maybe your take on it. As we move from Agile to Agile DevOps, what effect does that have on the SAP world?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the whole discussion whether SAP and DevOps fit is kind of philosophical here, because as a matter of fact, and the truth of the matter is that SAP forces you to become kind of DevOps-like anyway. Their upgrade policy is changing significantly when you enter S/4HANA. Today when you're in ECC, you have these 4 times a year upgrades, but that is kind of okay. I know that there have been more often upgrades in the past, but now it's like 4 times a year. But when you go S/4HANA, then you have I know 50 updates are planned just for the remaining 2020. Okay, 50.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot, huh? I mean, you don't need to embrace each and every one, and for sure the velocity is going to cool down a bit, so simply because this is too much. But as a general observation, the release schedule of SAP is accelerating massively. So you will need to be able to be kind of DevOps-like in order to keep pace, even with SAP's update and upgrade policy. That's one aspect. The other one is the need from your customer engagement systems, okay? Because these introduce the products more often and want to change them, and at a certain level of your core system, your packaged application system, you will be able to adopt to that. So you will not be able to keep the changes out for long. So I think SAP requires DevOps going forward, just like all the other packaged application systems. This is not just specific for SAP, it's true for an SFTC as well, for a ServiceNow, and so on. And these guys also have big problems, right, when it comes to updates and upgrades. It's not just SAP people trying to shy away from updates, upgrades. No. SFTC, same thing. ServiceNow, same thing, right? It's always horror update. Oh my God. And so they're forced to do that also. What I believe, though, is different compared to bespoke application development is simply where the pain is residing the most. I would say the pain index is the highest in development when it comes to bespoke apps. The pain index in an SAP system is more leaning towards the operation side. They need because the, so to say, established regression stack is so much bigger. Right? Of course, you're just customizing 30% of that stuff. 70% is already here. I mean, 30% is still massive, don't get me wrong, but 70% is already here. So the pain and the pain spans the whole 100%. That is more with the guys in production than with the guys on the customizing and development side. I think that's different compared to bespoke. And that is also where the perspective is kind of different, right? I would say in a bespoke app, all the power is with is with the developers in this DevOps flavor that we see on packaged apps. It's coming more from the operations side, I would say.
Absolutely. You know, I think what we're dealing with here is a question of perception versus reality to a certain extent, Wolfgang, and you brought it out in your comments. Casey from our audience says, can you address the perception that SAP is so complicated that it takes entire project teams months and years to fully implement? And I think that this is true, right? That this is a perception is true. Is it true in fact? I don't know. I'll ask Ann and Frank and Chris Mitchell, you dealt with this, but certainly the perception, and I think in a good chunk of our DevOps audience, right? Because we're DevOps.com. We talk to the DevOps world here. I think a good chunk of our DevOps audience has that perception. So myth or fact? Frank, why don't you kick us off on that one?
So this is a good question in this area. So I strongly believe that coming from the more older world, that it is possible to change into this direction, that there is a need. So for me, this is not a myth in this area, especially when it's triggered out of the now the changes in the SAP discussions coming up, triggered, for example, with S/4HANA. So we have seen that it is possible to set up, for example, continuous deployment change with clients and to go down the release cycle. And it is all about really then continuous testing. And this is possible to set up, but of course it is a lot of work which we are covering here. But it is possible, and especially now with the new compelling event, when people think, in the old world, we have built our big and monolith ERP systems, right? And we have to now rethink how we set up the future with S/4HANA, and you have tendencies into go more best practice, lean architecture in the ERP, keep your core clean, push things out to the satellites. So all these things to prepare for a more frequent change in the ERP system. This philosophy is all of the discussion when you look for the future in S/4HANA. And this, of course, is then supported with being more agile and adapt to more frequent changes, not only with the release coming in from the vendor, but even coming from the business demand. So SAP perception and the readiness of the ecosystem is changing to be more agile and respond quicker to market change. And therefore, I have to change my ERP more often. And that's why we see in most of the discussions about the change to S/4HANA, now the discussion about how do I do it first time right with an integrated testing suite and prepare for quick and upcoming changes all the time. This is part of every discussion now. So I think that it is possible, and the perception in the SAP community is changing and moving towards the right way.
Agreed. Anybody else comment on that?
I guess I'd like to chime in here and say it's a reality that it can happen. So I will say to install SAP changes, say within a month, you do have to have a DevOps style of working. And this is a support team or a project team, it doesn't matter. But you do have to have a DevOps style. And the other thing you have to have is you've got to have tools that can support it. For anybody to go into fast delivery within the world of SAP, you've got to have impact analysis. You've got to have some way of doing fast testing. And in my experience, we had both. At the time, it was SAP's BPCA, which I know now that they're not supporting. But at the time, it worked. And it was able to show our business contacts exactly what changed. And we also had, Tosca installed. And we were able to then link that change out of BPCA directly into the automated test case. And we were running tens of thousands of tests a month. But it took those two aspects of delivery, change impact analysis that showed us what changed so that we could hone in on exactly what to test, and then to have the automated testing tool. Now, I mentioned BPCA. SAP isn't supporting that now, but we do have Live Compare as it's up and coming, and here live. Friend here, Chris, right? That will do the same thing, but you've got to have that. You can't do it without some sort of a tool set that allows it to happen. And those weren't advertisements, by the way, as much as it was a reality of, for SAP to be delivered in every month change cycles, or to do an upgrade over the matter of, say, 3 months instead of 6 months, you have to have tools to support it.
You know, a comment from our audience, from this person's perspective, testing, especially regression testing and test automation, is key to faster deployment. And I think, Ann, that kind of in line with your comments. Chris, what's your take on that?
So I wouldn't say that because it's SAP, that means the projects are going to be 5 years long before you can even do anything with the software. I would say that SAP provide functionality that reaches to all aspects of our business. So generally the scope of an SAP implementation might be a little bit bigger than for some line of business specific applications. So the virtue of the fact that the scope is larger will drive a longer duration. But if you look at companies that have established SAP implementations today, and as Anne said, it's not, oh, now we're just beginning to think about how might we deliver things faster. Companies are doing this today. I know we have one organization in the consumer product space where their own industry was facing quite a lot of disruption. And so the business was saying, we need to respond. And that translates not just, as Wolfgang said, from the systems of engagement, differentiation, it means changing our SAP systems much more frequently. And they've gone from 11 to 88 releases a year of SAP. That's more than once a week. And that means shipping to production. Of course, I would say that an instrumental part of this is the right tooling, but a key part was the organizational change, this idea that DevOps is about a way we organize ourselves to get stuff done. So I think it's the combination of those things, but there's one example of where it's not a myth, it's a reality that organizations can go fast with SAP.
Absolutely. And I will just mention Nicholas from the audience. I don't know if he's with SAP. Frank, I'm going to ask you to comment on this one. It's a pleasure to interact. He needs to say that SAP is still supporting BPCA.
Okay. All right. Good.
I don't know who Nicholas is, and if in fact
it may be. I think it may be an old friend of mine, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens. We're not going to ask. We're not going to ask. Frank, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So I think, so to not go for the advertisement, there are of course multiple tools you can use to impact or to detect the analysis or the change impact in the transport request. One is BPCA, of course. The other one we heard is Live Compare. There are some other ones as well. But I think that the question is which one suits best in the end from my perspective. And it's not only to really identify the tooling to change for which regression tests do I have to run for the change I did. It's in the end to identify as well which test cases might be missing. Because this is a very important one as well, because if you then find out there's a lot of stuff missing in the testing, that it will slow you down in your release cycle again. So then for this, you have to make the choice of the tool which supports these two more important features or most important features in kind of live comparison.
Hey, Alan, if I can jump in here
Sure,
too.
Rachel, go ahead.
You know, when we started out, you were talking about going from one release a year to two, now you've doubled, and once a quarter you've quadrupled. One of the things that can force this is going to a SaaS or a cloud solution, and SAP does have their cloud platform. So they obviously now have the challenge of, how do I introduce, as Chris was talking about, 88 changes a year, it can be on-prem or in the cloud. So kind of filling in the reality, another element of the reality picture, SAP has a pretty vibrant community in their website. I think it's community.sap.com, if I remember right. And they have a whole topic around DevOps. And they've published a number of articles about how you can use sort of CI/CD approach with SAP, and plug in your tools, testing tools and otherwise into that, and tie it into your GitHub repository for builds and tests and deploy. What I've seen of it is primarily focused on the cloud platform, so it may also apply to Prem, I don't know that, but they've got a pretty vibrant community that's building around DevOps. So that should tell us that SAP believes that's part of their future, and maybe it has to be because of the cloud.
Could be. Guys, our audience is getting impatient. They want to dive in a little bit deeper. Wolfgang, I'm going to throw this next question at you, and hopefully it'll kick off a discussion among all of us here. It says, can you please demonstrate an example of how a CI/CD pipeline is actually established in an SAP kind of project?
Okay, thank you. I think it's not so much different, right? Why would it? I mean, of course, the mechanisms are different in the SAP language. You talk about transports, you know all that regarding deployment, but it's not that different. You would deploy your stuff into your quality system, and that, of course, you can trigger automatically, and then you would run your tests automatically. What you should do, though, given that you were pointing towards complexity, Ellen, before, right? That was the question. Are SAP systems so complex? I think I'm with Chris here. It's just because they can do so many things. It's just because they're so massive. The scope is so broad. I mean, it's not that they're unnaturally complex. They're just complex given the span of capabilities that they offer. So and that drives the need for this change impact analysis. You need to have that in order to really succeed. If you don't do it, it's like shooting, how do you call these guns with all these small little, instead of a bullet, they have these small little things that they put out there. You know what I mean? These kind of guns that just spread out a lot of small particles and try to find something, right? This is just not the right thing. For these SAP systems, you want to have bullets onto the changes. Otherwise, it's just going to be overwhelmingly complex. So no chance without that change impact analysis. Ideally, you can even integrate that run of the change impact analysis in order to select the automation that needs to be executed, right? These things need to be integrated. So have we implemented that? We have, for instance, for a big retailer, one of the largest retailers here in Europe, where it works exactly that way. So the automation would even select the tests to be executed and give a warning about what is missing, like Frank pointed out, right? You have this test gap that is also going to be visualized. It says beep, 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 beep. This stuff is missing here, okay? You're still going to decide whether you're going to go live or not. Maybe you are okay, and say, oh, well, it's missing, so big deal. But that is going to become transparent, and it should go even further so that you should have some load testing as well in the continuity of the software testing approach, right? Especially when you move towards the new technologies which may not be on-prem anymore, but which may be infrastructure as a service or software as a service. So, but apart from this, it's just like each and every other project would have CI/CD, right? It's not any different, I would say.
Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you want to have a concrete example of a CI/CD cycle, which we introduce for a client. So for example, for one project we started in Jira. So we said, okay, now we want to be agile and all this stuff. So we are using Jira as well for all the user stories and those, and it harmonized it with the other communities. So then the issue was created in Jira. And then you get a direct linkage, if you want to be a little more technical, to the tooling from the charm document to the solution manager, where you then create the change document ID. So you connect Jira and solution manager charm, which is the first instance if you want to create more the CD part of CI, right? But this is the first thing. These are the two tools where this kind of things is possible. You can integrate then workflow for Outlook approval if you still like that, for the changes to be committed. And then you can deploy them once a change is created, kind of shadow or transport requests, as one example, to your quality system, and then run, for example, the regression test suite, which you have then built up before that to see if there are any impacts. The same thing that you can run tools to identify which test cases you would like to run directly in the same automatic chain as well, like BPCA, or live compare or whatever, to give you the test case which you should run if you just want to do a smoke test, or if you want to run the full regression test for this change scope, whatever. Run this automatically and then get the whole feedback then back to the solution manager and to Jira as well. So this is an example tool chain which you can then use. So I did not mention now which tool for the automatic testing execution. Of course, there are more on the market, which you can easily integrate into this technical workflow. And then these ones you can then connect and then ensure that you are very quick in doing that. So this is possible to get this in a really automated chain as well. So some colleagues of mine actually are really thinking of saying, if we want to do more the CI approach into this value, into this tooling chain as well, let's commit automatically all the changes at every night, for example, on a quality environment, and then run all the time automatically then the test cases overnight. So not about thinking about the deployment already that we say we want to deploy to production, but then run overnight what the people have done in SAP, customizing, and then get a feedback on all the regression test scope with everyday change. So there are a lot of things you can do, and you can integrate this tooling in a real efficient workflow and value chain as well, which is quite suitable for clients. I hope it was not too technical now.
No, if you saw the questions we're getting here, I'm afraid to even ask them. I think we need an SAP support person to get to some of these questions. They're very specific. But Chris, it looks like you wanted to chime in here, and I don't want to thwart the conversation.
No, just briefly, I would add that it's not that we have to wait until things land in or even promote to QA before we can be doing useful work. I mean, if we think about CI/CD pipelines outside of SAP, the very act of committing the change is an event that triggers a whole bunch of activities, from code quality analysis. So structurally look at the changes that the developer has made and judge whether they are of a suitable quality. Similar things can happen in SAP. I mean, the vocabulary is different. Now it's when a developer releases a task, that's the triggering event that enables us in development to look at things like the ABAP unit test framework. Are people using it? Do they have unit test coverage? So this fits in the general theme of shift left, right? Find issues in development where it's much cheaper to fix them. I think those outside SAP established benefits of CI/CD pipelines are practical things that can be delivered in SAP today. I know we're doing it with customers.
Yes.
Absolutely. Frank, just for your own, one of the things I love about these roundtables is, I mean, literally people from around the world. So a friend of ours here from Australia wanted to let you know that the integration of Jira with Solman is something they're doing over there in Australia, and they got there to build their CI/CD pipeline, and they're deploying every 2 weeks. So there's proof in the pudding, as they say.
Great.
Another question, there's so many questions here from the audience. Is it possible to implement a test-driven approach to SAP development? How difficult can it be? And are there any special tools? Do we have any testing experts on the panel? But in spite of that, Anne, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask if maybe you want to kick that off, and then we'll have Wolfgang and Chris chime in.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And it's interesting when you do get into the world of testing, you realize that you're not in a world of testing, you're in a world of delivery. And when you take a look at the life cycle of a piece of code, starting with requirements, you have to have a way to collect those requirements in a very efficient manner. And I'll say forcing a business contact to, I'll call it talk through, to do what they do. And that's where you start. And with that business contact as a developer, then you start to appreciate the business requirement. And when I say business requirement, I'm talking about what does the business need in order for this change to help the business grow. Sometimes in the world of IT, we forget how the company makes money. And that's the one thing with DevOps that I had found to be such great. It's just been great that everybody starts learning more about the business. So continuing though, the quality mindset starts with requirements. You do use code impact analysis, you use code security checks. You start looking at your performance of that code. You start talking about how many users there's going to be. And the shift left, it's a great term, but what does it really mean? It means talking about everything as soon as you know that there's a question and not putting it off. And then as you get into the build cycle, of course, there's all kinds of ways to use your JIRAs and the tools of today, again, not advertising anyone, in order to do your inspection of that code. And then coming on around, you go into a kind of an acceptance environment. Throughout all of this, though, you start looking at the tool sets that you have for impact analysis. You look at how you're using your cloud in order to get to that speed to market that we're all looking for right now. And then as you go into more of your, I'll call it your productive phase, you also start looking at your automated testing. You're testing it multiple times. You're testing what's important. This change impact analysis not only will tell you what changed, but by rating the business impact of that change, you're doing a risk analysis. And that risk analysis will take you into testing the 10% of the test cases of what you used to do as being the most important. Anyway, I'll stop at that point and let others respond.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I may, I would like to really point towards the test-driven development question here. I think let's go one step back. What is the core of test-driven development? The core of it is that there is a specification by example, which you need to meet. You specify some behavior, and that may be on a technical level or it may be on a business level. When you call it on a technical level, the expected behavior leads into test-driven development. When you call it on a business level, you call it BDD, behavior-driven development. What is the right level, the right granularity? I personally believe that in a system like SAP, I would personally lean more towards behavior-driven development than test-driven development, because the business, bottom line, it is about what the business is going to experience from that application. What is the business behavior? And call it behavior-driven development or specify it differently on a business level expectation, right? I mean, specification by example has been out there for a long time, and BDD is now the more modern way of doing it. Is it given when then? That's not that relevant, right? Specification by example is that the real core of it, and that is truly relevant. it brings us back to kind of the old V model, that's gone out of shape, or out of fashion, I should say, not out of shape. The old V model that now nobody can even talk about because it's not buzzword compliant anymore, is still there. It's still there. You wanna make sure you specify the behavior early on, and you bring and you drive the application's behavior towards that expectation. That's what it is. And I do not believe that this needs to be necessarily happening on a technical level. If you go and ask people who have established TDD, there is a broad range of different opportunities and different experiences in the community. And the more you dig into, the more you're going to see that it might be on a too granular level to drive application development if you do it on a technical level. So I personally believe that test-driven development is too low, but that's a general sentiment. It's not just for SAP. I think that the behavior-driven development approach is going to be way more promising. Sorry for being so frank here. I hope nobody's offended by that.
No, it's good.
Chris, would you like to chime in on that, or?
So I think that just picking up on the test-driven development aspect, I mean, SAP do provide a complete unit test framework for their ABAP development environment, right? The programming environment of SAP. I think in ad hoc surveys I've done at special interest groups run by user group organizations, no one is using it. The capabilities are there, no one's using it.
Why do you think?
I think that's back to a general view, which is that people look at test-driven development as it's a cost. I now have to wait longer to get the change landed in production because you're doing all of this additional work. And what gets lost in that conversation is actually what we eliminated was all the rework because of all the bugs we didn't find until too late.
Well, just a question. We always have this relationship to development, but SAP changes are often not only development and creating big ABAP programs, but you change customizing and configuration, which has a lot of dependency. So I think that the discussion on creating big ABAP or good ABAP code is falling a little bit too short here, because the biggest change is the configuration, which impacts on the whole value chain in an SAP system. And I think we have to ensure that all in each nitty-gritty change you do there is secured during or I don't know, automatic testing approach, for example. So this is for me the more complicated one. Yeah.
I agree. Agreed.
And what makes SAP so unique in the discussion of DevOps? Yeah.
Also, another question here is that what are the optimal SAP testing automation tools you suggest, which fit best with the DevOps platform? Wolfgang, I can't imagine.
I'm biased. I'm biased here, unfortunately. There's let me just say there is a company out there. The name is Tricentis, and they offer some great product. And this has been even endorsed by SAP lately because we have gone into a very strategic partnership. And if you would ask SAP today for a recommendation, they would say this is Tricentis. But I'm biased. Please, others.
You know what? In the interest of fairness, and that's Frank. So Frank, obviously, the recent partnership with SAP and Tricentis promises to change. You have Tricentis, a worldwide leader in testing, promises to change the very orbit of this. But I imagine there are other options out there.
Yes, of course there are, but I have to be careful now that I'm not a little bit biased as well, because Wolfgang me just published an article which will come out next month with us two on the cover. Where Cognizant says we go the Tricentis way for test automatization in the SAP arena. Of course, so Cognizant has a very huge SAP practice, and we are serving all tools in this area. Of course, it would be unfair to say that you can't use other ones, but I think there is a certain logic why SAP has made this strategic choice. First, I think they found out in their own tool chain, like for example BPCA as one part, there is something missing, and there is something to be integrated. And then I think everybody has to view why SAP has made these particular changes and picked one strategic partner for this collaboration. So from my perspective, there are only 2 companies outside which offer some really good products in the SAP arena up to a certain extent, and one of them you have already seen here in the call.
So if I can, yeah, let me add, because back in 2015, my team went into a project to determine how to get out of script-based automated testing, and meaning that we wanted to go to model-based testing. And just make a long story short, script testing, all right, required more developers. And it was taking anywhere from 16 to 40 hours to create a scripted test and then a day to run it. And what we found is that our users were designing those tests as if they were doing them manually, and we just programmed it. And they ran a long time. So when we started looking at model-based testing, which kind of broke it down almost, I'll say, at the T-code level, we found that those could get created in 4 hours, and they were executing in minutes. And so we did a benefits analysis along that route. So for those of you out there that are wondering, okay, it's a bunch of Tricentis folks here. Yeah, it's true. And yeah, Tricentis is now #1 for Forrester and Gartner. And yeah, for Tricentis back in 2015 is the company that we went with. So again, model-based testing is where you need to be, and making sure that that model-based testing can go at the API level.
Excellent, excellent stuff. Guys, we're only like 3 or 4 minutes from the top of the hour, and it's going to take us a little while to wrap up. I wanted to give each of you a chance, just a final comment, but I'm going to ask, if possible, if you can keep it to 30, 45 seconds or so. We do respect people's time, and I wanted to announce we do give out 4 Amazon gift cards to our audience today, and the winners today are Ann W., Lance N., Tom C., and Richard T. And our folks will reach out to you and get your Amazon cards to you. But I think, Frank, why don't you, if you don't mind, any closing thoughts? And don't feel compelled if you don't have anything specific. We can just move along.
Yeah. No, I think we touched a lot of interesting points about that DevOps is relevant in the SAP arena, specifically when it comes now in the next discussions with S4HANA, whatever. So everybody should have a look on that. What would DevOps mean for me in this area? We talked a lot about the importance of continuous testing and how you enable continuous testing. I think there is just one dimension which we have not touched, which should be maybe then validated or by the audience as well, is cloud. Because a big thing about is, if you have a good regression suite, is that you have good test environments ready, which you can deploy frequently and change and set up a new system. And to have this flexibility, I think cloud is one important option when you want to go for DevOps in the SAP arena as well.
Excellent. Chris?
So I'll echo some of the things I've already said. You can't avoid changing your SAP systems. Forget what some analysts said a few years ago about, oh, don't change your systems of record, focus on your systems of engagement. You can't avoid changing SAP. It's the only way to meet the growing business demands. And the benefits that we've all observed outside of SAP in continuous integration, testing, and delivery pipelines are available and are being used today by SAP customers. DevOps, is it relevant for SAP? Completely.
Excellent. Mitchell?
Yeah, I really want to build on Chris's point. And with the increase in acceptance of digital transformation projects, digital projects, it forces business process change. So you have to work in an SAP environment or your ERP system. So it's definitely relevant. And I think Ann had some really sage advice about the model-driven testing to really save some time and effectiveness on it. So there's some great resources. I popped a few into the chat, so feel free to check that out. I also want to mention Accelerated Strategies has a new report out today about remote work and software development, kind of the COVID, post-COVID. So please check that out at accelst.com. Thanks.
Okay. Wolfgang, we're going to give you the last word because we're going to let Ann go. Ann, you're next.
Okay. Let Ann go. Okay. So Ann will keep it brief. I say that when you do need to look at changing your tool set, you've got to have a cheerleader. You've got to have somebody that can, I'll call it, kind of power through an organization. But that cheerleader also needs some C-suite support. And otherwise, you're just going to keep hitting a brick wall. And so if a lot of what we've talked about, you're going, yeah, I wish I could, find the cheerleader and then let the cheerleader power through and get C-level support with the benefits that go along with what we're talking about.
And Ann, I made you go first in the beginning, so I didn't want you to have to also go last. So that's why I said I wanted Ann to go. But I apologize. Wolfgang, we're almost out of time, but go ahead.
Just one sentence from me. As I mentioned earlier, to me, it's not a question whether DevOps fits into SAP. DevOps is a necessity for SAP as well. It cannot just step outside of the major trends here. And I'm super excited to see the move there, and we are here to help.
Excellent. Guys, I need to end it. We're over the top of the hour. What a fantastic panel. Thank you so much. We have a ton of questions we didn't get to. My friends at Tricentis and the rest of the team, we'll get these questions out to you. Let's try to get these people their answers. To our audience, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed today's event. We'll be back with another roundtable, and another edition of Devops Unbound will be out in 2 weeks from today. So you can check that out as well. Have a great day, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel for Devops.com, Devops. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you soon at another webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed the roundtable. Up next, we're going to go to Charlene O'Hanlon, our Managing Editor, Chief Content Officer. Charlene has the news around the MediaOps site, preview of this week's great webinars, as well as an interview with Guy Eisenkot from Bridge Crew. He's VP of Product there, discussing security challenges and risks associated with infrastructure as code. Charlene, take it away.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Tuesday edition of the headlines. First up on Devops.com, we have an article that discusses how teams can cut their design sprints in half, from 5 days to 3 or less, without sacrificing quality. This was written by someone whose company recently did that, compressing the first 3 steps of design sprints, understand, ideate, and decide, into a 4-hour event rather than 3 days, and had successful results. For startups or organizations that are lean and just don't have the time to spend 5 days working on a new design for an app or a new functionality, this article is definitely worth a read, as it offers up some step-by-step information on how UserSnap did it successfully. And we also have the second article in a series by Don McVitie on DevSecOps. Don is looking at the various technologies that help organizations adopt a DevSecOps mindset, and in the first article he wrote about static analysis and its role and place in the DevOps toolchain. In this next article, Don takes a deep dive into source composition analysis, what it is, what to look for, and how organizations can use it as part of their DevSecOps tools kitty. If you're unfamiliar with or having trouble understanding how to shift from DevOps to DevSecOps, give both installments a read. Totally worth it. In news, Intel said a gold image of its One API for unifying infrastructure as code will be available starting next month. One API to rule them all, as it were. At least that's what Intel is striving for. A standard API for accessing the compute capabilities of any processor, regardless of what company manufactured it. So for those of you playing at home, a gold image is a master image, the mold from which distributable models are cast. Intel is encouraging cloud service providers and builders of systems deployed on premises to embrace One API as a way to standardize the way GPUs, CPUs, field programmable arrays, gate arrays, and other processors are incorporated within an environment. Currently, programming models are designed for single classes of processors. One API could lead to more standardization, which could lead to better and deeper integration of systems. Intel certainly has nothing to lose by trying to be the standard bearer. So we'll see if the industry falls into lockstep. Over on Container Journal, we have news about Cockroach Labs, which has updated its open source distributed SQL database to make it easier to deploy on Kubernetes clusters using operator tools. Cockroach DB 20.2 is designed around a shared nothing architecture that makes it easier for applications to scale up and down, along with the rest of Kubernetes environments. The Cockroach DB architecture makes it possible to employ a single data layer across a distributed Kubernetes environment regardless of what distribution of Kubernetes is being run or the number of regions, masters, or clusters. Cockroach Labs' moves are just the latest in a number of announcements regarding databases and data stores for applications deployed on Kubernetes clusters. In fact, the space is now suffering from a wealth of options. That's good news, but it also makes deciding which one to choose that much more difficult. Over on Security Boulevard, we have a piece that looks at the rise in targeted spear phishing events since the onset of COVID-19. The article was born from a session at the recent Exabeam Spotlight 20 virtual conference that featured some security executives from multiple industries, including entertainment and logistics, who recounted their experiences with target phishing attempts over the past 8 or so months. They all agreed that what they're seeing is growing in sophistication and working in part because of the way they're being sent, which is through breached accounts. Now more than ever, as employees are working remotely and aren't being as diligent about security threats as they might be in an office, it's critical organizations do what they can to keep the systems, data, and employees secure, the panel said. And I would tend to agree. Also on the site is an article about the increase in electric vehicles and the security implications of charging stations. Public charging stations are becoming more prevalent as more electric vehicles hit the road, and they're supposed to provide a cashless, transactional experience. The EV industry has developed its own standard to make that happen at any public charging station in the world, but the proposed standard does leave some areas vulnerable, which introduces governance issues. Obviously, this is early days for electric vehicle adoption and use, and there are many kinks to work out. But for EV use to become more widespread, users need to know their data is safe when they stop to recharge. Otherwise, our reliance on fossil fuels will just continue. All right, that's all I have for for today's edition of the news headlines. Please come on back Thursday for another fresh batch of headlines. Until then, have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Guy Eisenkot, who is the VP of Product at a company called Bridge Crew. Guy, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Charlene.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about Bridge Crew. I'm not really familiar with your company, so would love to hear about it.
Yeah, my favorite topic in the world. Bridge Crew has been around for not too long, actually, almost 2 years now, a little under 2 years. And we are in the cloud security space. And what we do is we are trying to utilize a phase, a transition in how cloud infrastructure is being developed, and essentially ride that wave to bring in a new generation of work processes and technology working together to promote cloud security for essentially any type of organization. And the company was founded, as I mentioned, like February 2019, and has been growing steadily with great funding from Battery Ventures and NFX Ventures in the last couple of years, supporting us and constantly growing the team and getting a lot of support from the cloud security community as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I know that the cloud has really become a hot topic this year. I mean, it's been a hot topic for a while, but this year in particular, because of the pandemic, and so many organizations have become completely remote. The cloud has really taken on a greater significance among a lot of organizations in their infrastructures. And I'm wondering if, because of the way things are kind of moving in 2020, have you guys noticed any differences in possibly either the way, the way organizations are kind of adopting the cloud and utilizing it, or actually as part of that, if there have been any differences in the way they maybe view their cloud security efforts or view cloud security in general?
Absolutely. We've seen incremental growth on our open source tooling that we open up to the developer cloud security developer community, as well as on our commercial platform as well. Obviously, the fact that teams are working inherently remote is forcing everybody to be much more conscious about collaboration in the development workspace, and definitely with that tide of additional people having hands-on access to essentially what's now the unilateral infrastructure backbone of practically any type of modern organization is opening up a lot of risk surfaces that is becoming something that's much more of a concern for both people on the DevOps and the infrastructure, cloud infrastructure side, but at the same time, for the guys and gals running the cloud security and compliance programs, obviously that's becoming a much bigger focus, and we've seen that resonate in traction, but much more in awareness. Absolutely, getting a lot more inbound conversations with people that are planning to utilize the fact that infrastructure is being developed in a much more decentralized manner. And try to, again, ride that wave and bring in a higher standard or a new standard of conformance into their stack.
Okay. All right. Well, what do you think about where people or where organizations are on their cloud journey as it relates specifically to security? I mean, do you think that there's much more awareness now that cloud has become such an important element of infrastructure makeup for so many different organizations? Or do you think that there's still a level of complexity maybe that's associated with cloud security that organizations just don't, they're just not comprehending it as perhaps as well as they should be?
Yeah, Charlene, I think you're spot on with identifying complexity as the number one issue that practitioners are facing today. If you look even at a popular service like Amazon Web Services, 150 individual products, probably hundreds, if not thousands of individual APIs, lots of knobs and switches that are essentially accessible to any developer. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, you have this amazing canvas that enables almost anyone to spin up infrastructure from anywhere. But on the other hand, there's a level of complexity that comes inherently with that, and that requires people to continue to educate themselves and to learn about this brand new way that is constantly changing and evolving, right? When we see better awareness and increased adoption, we ask ourselves two things: one, how easy it is today to develop cloud infrastructure in a secure way, and are cloud providers doing enough so that really all of these tooling that they're exposing out to the public is being used in a way that's responsible, effectively not only creating business value for them, but also keeping the information of their customers here.
Well,
so we're
yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're obviously in the camp that thinks that there is a lot of complexity, definitely, and we look forward to seeing how some of that complexity eventually gets simplified by tooling such as infrastructure as code, as an example, or tooling like Terraform that takes some of that complexity and abstract it into common constructs that essentially any developer can use in a friendly manner.
To your point, there are so many different security kind of controls out there right now that the cloud services providers offer, not to mention, how many different vendors are out there that are touting security for the cloud. So it's kind of an embarrassment of riches. And it's interesting that the cloud services providers, at least from what I can see, they really haven't provided a ton of direction on the best ways to utilize some of these security offerings that they have. And also, along with that, a lot of the nomenclature and just the way that security offerings are provided by the different cloud services providers, they're different between each provider. There's a disparity, if you will, between cloud services providers. They actually may have the exact same offering, but it's labeled differently, or it's got a different nomenclature or a different title, or it's just different description. So you actually can't really do kind of a one-to-one comparison. Do you think that cloud services providers maybe can do a little bit more to kind of help the community better understand the different services and how maybe they can be, kind of an apples to apples comparison, if you will?
I think it's not, I'll be frank, I think it's not necessarily fair to really put all the cloud providers into one bucket. Essentially, when you have, one company that really dominates probably half of the market and really has gone a very long way in actually listening to the developer community and exposing a lot of their very advanced features using APIs. And that's actually what really enforces companies like Bridgecrew to tightly integrate into those APIs and to actually commit to those for the long haul. On the other end, you have companies that have invested a lot in their internal infrastructure and security, products in a way that made it essentially a competitive aspect. Not to name one provider individually, but some providers have chosen to actually market them as themselves as the secure cloud. So I believe that when you stack those three one against each other, it's clear that eventually they're in big, very strong competition against each other. There's no unilateral goal to conform and to make it easy for developers to be able to control each and every cloud from a single working space. Cloud providers eventually want to suck you into their individual domains and make you actually spend your infrastructure dollars there. And I think that's where the community has the say in to come in with the power of the masses and to actually try to create out some, pull out some of that complexity and try to solve this problem together rather than to wait until cloud providers essentially join hands and solve that for us.
It's, we are seeing a trend toward more organizations moving toward multi-cloud environments because obviously, they want their best of breed. So they're going to use a one cloud provider for something. And then, and so having a level of governance, if you will, around cloud security and just the different offerings between cloud providers, I think would actually help organizations kind of better understand what they're getting with each provider. But to your point, also, it's kind of, maybe it's a little unfair to kind of put it on the shoulders of the cloud providers. But I wonder if that is actually kind of maybe stymieing or maybe holding back the space a little bit more because there is kind of that inherent level of just the breadth and depth of offerings that are out there. Do you think maybe there's just almost too much there that it's just so difficult to parse through that organizations are kind of having a more difficult time maybe understanding what it is actually that's available to them in the cloud?
Yeah, when my co-founder, I'll quote him for saying, our CTO, Barak, he mentions that, going into the cloud and developing the cloud is generally a constant, being in a constant migration phase. Mm-hmm. So you're either coming off one cloud, going to the other, shifting workloads to a better cost-efficient service, moving from the same, different services within your cloud provider. All of these fragmented pieces of the puzzle that each one of them, has great benefits, is probably, for most developers, I think is one of the main challenges on the day-to-day, facing on the day-to-day kind of routine or schedule. But when I look at it from like more of an overview, I think that's essentially where the benefit could come from for security in that sense, because essentially to achieve conformity across all those fragmented services is probably an ideal we can strive for, but probably not achieve in the short term. And where I see lots of great potential is effectively when you effectively figure out that it's not only a migration task, but it's essentially an engineering task. So once you get to the point where cloud is engineering and infrastructure in the cloud is engineering and security is essentially engineering, then you start to bring in some of those constructs that we know from classic engineering. We need to test our code. We need to deploy it in a consistent manner. We need to monitor and trace it in a consistent manner. And when you apply these practices that we've been applying in this industry for years, you understand that it's not that complicated. So it's a new type of service, new type of API, but when it's effectively all engineering, all development, it actually makes things much simpler.
Interesting. All right. So organizations that are moving more of their workloads into the clouds, are there any best practices or some things really that they need to consider when they are kind of looking at cloud security from kind of an infrastructure as code angle, or anything that they need to kind of keep in mind as they move forward with the cloud?
Yeah, I think one good place to start from is really analyzing what type of footprint you have today and what part of it can be actually moved into infrastructure as code. It's like any migration; it's not really a binary track. There's benefits to continuing to manage some elements of existing infrastructure in the way you've done it before, but there's areas where it's overwhelmingly better and much more manageable to shift into infrastructure. And I'll give you two examples. One of them is being networking. So networking, it's not a very glamorous part of the profession, but we essentially rely on the fact that when we put our applications in the public cloud, some parts of it need to be public and some need to be private. And the huge benefit of using infrastructure as code and defining network and networking in general in code is that it gives engineers the opportunity to very quickly respond to scenarios where those valuable resources that need to remain private. And essentially, I think when looking at a migration or at a journey into cloud and into infrastructure as code, networking is probably the first place I would look at in a place where it requires conformance. It's a high risk and actually a high touch environment. And that's where generally I point our customers to start working on. The other area is obviously identity and access management, which follows the same kind of construct principles.
All right, great. Anything more?
All good. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think?
Okay. All right. Great. Well, Guy, thank you very much for taking the time and walking me through it. There's some good stuff there. I know that infrastructure as code is becoming a much bigger part of the conversation these days. So appreciate your time. Appreciate your insights very much.
Thank you, Shirley, and happy to talk to you today.
All right. Great. Okay, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Tuesday edition of the webinars previews. As I always tell you, we have lots of great webinars coming up on Devops.com, Security Boulevard, and Container Journal, but I wanted to highlight 3 of them that are coming up sooner, so hopefully you can mark your calendar and attend. The first one is happening Wednesday, November 18th at 7 a.m. Eastern. It's called Up for Debate. Does microservices simplify or complicate? It's sponsored by Nginx, which is part of F5. This is a panel discussion on the age-old question, should an organization keep its monolith or move to microservices? Up for debate in this webinar, does microservices simplify or complicate things? Mitch Ashley of ASG is the industry analyst providing the color commentary, if you will, and we'll have folks from Nginx and F5 offering up both points of view. Should be a really interesting webinar. Hope you can join us for that one. Next one is called Shifting Compliance and Security Left into the Hands of Developers. It's also happening November 18th, that's Wednesday, at 11 a.m. Eastern, sponsored by WhiteSource. In this webinar, Shari Itzan, who is a product manager at WhiteSource, and Riza Alavi, who is cybersecurity managing consultant at Wipro, will discuss how shift-left security capabilities rely heavily on an organization's ability to rapidly test and deliver to adopt a developer-friendly approach to continuous compliance and security. This should be another really interesting one. The folks at WhiteSource always do a really great job, so definitely one worth checking out. The final webinar I want to let you know about is called The Importance of Visibility and Security of Critical Applications in Cloud Environments. This one is also happening Wednesday, November 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Sounds like I'm going to be very busy this day. It's also on Devops.com, and it's sponsored by Red Hat Marketplace. As cloud and hybrid cloud adoption continues to grow, businesses increasingly are migrating their critical applications to commercial cloud platforms and employing DevOps workflows. But the shift to containers and DevOps strategies are enabling innovation velocity as well as improved user experience. However, these benefits do create some security challenges. So this webinar will focus on those challenges and offer some best practices for migrating critical applications to the cloud securely, as well as insight into how to increase the efficiency of security processes and DevOps workflows, how to tie CI/CD processes to enforcement of security requirements, and why cloud consumption of your security solution should matter. This one also sounds like a really, really interesting webinar for folks, especially who are looking into DevSecOps and migrating more applications to the cloud securely. So please, as I said before, you might want to check your calendar for this one. Okay, that's all I have for this edition of the webinars preview. So please check back on Thursday for another fresh batch. Until then, have a great day. Stay safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Next up, we've got Mitchell Ashley at Analyst Corner. Mitch's guest today is Mark Smalley of Smalley IT. He's lead editor of Axelos with the IDLE 4 High Velocity IT, and he's going to discuss his work creating the new contribution to IDLE 4. A lot of stuff going on with IDLE 4 modules. We'll let Mitch tell you all about it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I have the pleasure today of being joined by Mark Smalley. Mark is lead editor of High Velocity IT, part of the ITL4 initiative. Mark, welcome. He's also with Smalley.it, I believe a one-person firm. Welcome, Mark. Would you please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, sure, Mitch. Thank you. Yeah, Smalley.it, I've been on my own for about 8 years now. Previously, around 30 years at Capgemini and other managed application service providers. So we're very much on the application side, very much on the service provision side. That's really my background. Bit of personal background, born in London, but have lived in the Netherlands, just outside Amsterdam, for about 45 years now, which is not a bad place to be. And one of the recent initiatives I was involved with was the Axelos ITIL 4 update, responsible for the emergence of the High Velocity IT module, because it was quite an interesting process, pulling in knowledge from various areas in IT service management, but also agile DevOps and out of the IT space completely. For instance, some people may have come across the Toyota Way, the management book about the Toyota manufacturing process. Professor Jeff Leiker, Michigan University, he kindly contributed a bit to the book about the Toyota Kata, which is about an improvement method based on scientific thinking. So drew in people from various fields to try and get this thing off the ground.
That's got to make it really fun and engaging too. Why don't we start out with what do we mean by what's a good definition of high velocity IT? How would you give a kind of a working definition of that?
Yeah, well, I'd first qualify it by saying it's not actually high velocity IT, but it's more about higher velocity IT, because high would imply that there's low, and you'd say, high is good, low is bad. Well, it's not the case. We're on a gradient, on a spectrum from lower to higher velocity. We're looking at the kind of organizations that you'd say would be more digitally enabled than most. So the kind of organizations that use technology to do things significantly differently, or even do significantly different things because technology enables them to do that. And that requires a different way of thinking, a different way of working than many people are used to. So the book's about different ways of thinking, different ways of working, aimed primarily at people in the IT service management space who are now confronted with this digital stuff. How do we deal with that? And trying to get them, it's sort of a guided tour through the kind of things that you come across in these more highly digitally enabled organizations, to encourage them to unlearn old ways of working that aren't effective anymore, and integrate new ways of working, new approaches in how they do stuff.
I think one of the really important and kind of fascinating parts of your work on this, Mark, is it's not just about the bubble of IT or the bubble of my part of my role in IT. It's that high velocity for the whole organization and how you all work together. And I know it really, many places to start, but clearly product management, there's some outcome that we're doing all of this work for, some product or service or offering that we have, and that's a great place to really engage in kind of a systems thinking about this.
Yeah, very much so. It's taking the end-to-end perspective. We defined 5 objectives to give us a bit of guidance in this space. Talking firstly about valuable investments. Are you doing the right thing in the first place? Are you automating the right kind of business processes? Are you building digital products and services that are appealing to the marketplace? Or are you doing the right thing? Fast development, are you doing it quickly? resilient operations once it's up and running? Is it resilient? And deliberately using the word resilient rather than reliable, because the kind of systems we're dealing with are often complex and therefore unpredictable in their nature. They will fail. You know, these are not fail-safe systems. These are systems that should be safe to fail. So it's about the resilience. How quickly can you get the systems back up and running? And then the fourth objective is co-created value. Then again, you have that broader chain. That's when IT starts engaging again with the user community in that intricate and even intimate dance that they do together. That's, you know, to help the users derive value from the investment. And finally, the fifth overarching or underlying objective is all of the above. Assured conformance. It should you should be able to assure conformance to governance, risk, and compliance requirements, whatever they are in your kind of organization. So totally, it's what you said, the big picture, end to end.
Mm-hmm. Very much makes sense. You know, it's interesting. Tell me if this jives with what you've experienced. You know, highly reliability, the best way to do it is don't change anything, right? Make it very stable. But we live in a world where business needs to execute quickly, but also dynamically to react to changing market conditions, you know, pandemic being a great example of that, a tragic one, but very much one that's outside of our control, but also, you know, offensive strategies to go after markets and the degree that the whole kind of supply chain of the organization working together can effectively do that quickly, reliably, but also resiliently, so that, because you want to be able to experiment and try things, and maybe you need to fail to find the right answer for product mix or whatever. So I'm sorry, going too long, but it seems like that's an underlying driver behind all of why you took this approach, at least in part.
Yeah, well, certainly if you look at the dominant thinking behind most of the guidance, there's something behind it. There's that concept of co-creation, realizing that you don't do stuff and chuck it over the wall. You have to engage with other stakeholders. One of the things. The other main thing is working with in complex environments. Again, using that word complexity in the sense of complex adaptive systems, organizational systems, where you simply can't predict what's going to happen. And where you, because of the volatility, the unpredictability of stuff, you could say that's bad, but from a research and development perspective, you want to be able to, you know, 10 initiatives will fail, but it's that 10th one that's going to make you millions. You've got to benefit from that unpredictability. So it's really from the start through the whole life cycle that you're dealing with the unpredictability, which for many people in IT service management is a bit disconcerting, because if you go way back, you look at where people came from. IT service management people were very much concerned with the stability of systems and putting a wall around them with the best of intentions, with the belief system, safe is good. Whereas the developers had a different perspective, fast is good. So you got this fast versus safe. And seemingly irresolvable, that conflict. But if you look at it creatively, and this is something that we've got a lot to credit the DevOps community for. Now, we reference extensively stuff that's gone on in the DevOps world in the High Velocity IT book. The idea that and it goes back to lean as well, lean in particular, agile a little bit, working with small batches of work. If you do work in small batches and more frequently, then you reduce the risk, usually smaller changes and less risk in bigger changes. And the interesting thing comes along now. If you do changes more frequently, instead of saving them up for each, masses of changes each quarter, do them every day, then you develop your capability to change effectively. So paradoxically, you've turned it around completely. The more often you change, small changes, the better your change capability, and therefore the more confident you can be that the changes will go through pretty safely. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, these the groups that have to interact together, like if you've got a DevOps group or a classic IT service management group, they identify with their own belief system, and often the belief system is, good is fast, safe is fast. Safe is good, as opposed to fast is good. And how do you've got to get these people together and talk about this stuff to resolve the apparent conflict. But it's great. It's great stuff trying to build bridges between these communities.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, and thinking the sort of lean mindset and agile and iterative, which is very much where software in our product and organizations have moved to or are moving there. How do you deal with some of the legacy silos and, sort of that self-protection of don't change things or don't, let's focus on keeping things stable, or whatever the mantra of those individual groups are? How can this book, for example, this module, help people start to expand their thinking around those issues?
Well, firstly, if you look at organizations, they will vary in velocity across the various divisions and departments. So firstly, you've got to take a look at which part of the organization are we looking at? What is the appropriate velocity in the business there? What kind of cadence applies to their work? Interesting looking at the pharma industry that's traditionally been highly regulated with very long periods in which they work. There's no point speeding things up if you have to wait years before you can move to the next stage. It's like doing the Olympic Games. If it's you don't want the stadium there earlier. There's no point. So it's got to be very much in line with aligned with the business velocity. So look at the specific parts of the business. And depending on the kind of speed, and possibly you're dealing with legacy systems that don't need to go that much quicker. And what the advice we like to give in the guidance is, first couple of statements, the guidance is not complete, and the guidance is not intended to be prescriptive. We don't pretend to be able to prescribe how people should act. Rather, we're trying to encourage them to take a look at the 9 concepts and models that we've adopted, the 25 techniques, to see which techniques do you think would apply to you. So be selective, pick and mix, take a few things out, experiment with them, see if it works in your environment, because this is going back to lean. You mentioned lean. Going back to the lean movement, you'll probably know, many of our listeners or audience will know that that the Toyota production system was the precursor to the lean movement. And one of the grand figures in the TPS Toyota production system was Taiichi Ono, who came up with some wonderful sayings. One of which is, you should think for yourself and face your own difficulties. Don't try to borrow wisdom. So in other words, how another organization has done something, that's not going to work for you. You have a different kind of organization. So you really do have to dig deep and look at the specifics of your situation and pick the various parts that you think apply to you, and just experiment, see whether they work. So it's
really more of an adaptive approach versus prescriptive, right? It has to be done a certain way because one organization succeeded at it that way.
Yeah, no, and it's very tempting. People are looking for the quick fix. There's a fabulous cartoon. If anybody wants to look up a great cartoon, if you look up simple but wrong, complex but right, it comes up with a great cartoon. You see people following, and this is a sign pointing in 2 directions, and people, the masses are following the sign simple but wrong, because they're looking for a quick fix. And what better than looking at how another organization's done stuff? I say, let's do that. It's not a good idea usually. So you do have to be very, very critical, very, very selective.
Well, these are systemic changes. They're not, quick fixes or just change this one thing of how you're working, and suddenly you'll get different results. And one of those is we think about specialties or specialization of what we do, but we're also now thinking it's specialty roles, but it's also how those things work across the lifecycle, development, operations, product teams. So individuals and teams' abilities to work cross-functionally is a much higher order skill than maybe we valued, in the past.
Yeah, look at I think we can again, I credited the DevOps community for something, but look at the Agile community, how the concept of multifunctional, cross-functional product teams have emerged, where you've got business analyst disciplines, development disciplines, testing disciplines, all working together. It's interesting to think about the definition of done that they often apply as a concept that you'll come across in Agile and Scrum. When are we done? It often, in the Scrum world, it ends with a potentially deployable increment of software. Potentially deployable. The key word is potentially. It hasn't been deployed yet. So it's just asking for an extension of that domain of the team to not stop when it's deployable, but to actually deploy it. So start involving the DevOps kind of competencies as well. Then you could extend it further to the service area, because product owners should be aware that the kind of product that they're building, that needs to be accessed by people, and service is the vehicle that gives users access to your product. You build a great software product, but it's only through the vehicle of service that people get to it. And is the product owner, is the product team looking as much at service as they should be? And I think that's often not the case. And I'd certainly like to, in the role of bridge builder, like to encourage product teams to take a closer look at service and think about the kind of characteristics, the service experience as well, that they expect their users to have. So you can see a service substrate going through all of the life cycle, really, alongside the software and infrastructure artifacts.
I'm curious, you mentioned design earlier. Maybe this is what you're referring to. I'm curious if design thinking or the design approach is something that also influenced your work on this module. The idea that the outcome isn't the car, the outcome is the experience that the customer, the user of that vehicle has and expects, from whatever the product is that you're creating. Did that influence this work too?
Yeah, two things there. Design thinking we've referenced more at the start of the process, thinking about the kind of specifications, requirements that people have. But towards the end, thinking about the service experience, and you'll be familiar with the concept of service level agreements, which are often unfortunately formulated. We talk in terms of availability and performance and security and stuff like that, all very technical. But how do the users feel about this? And we're slowly extending that domain, the service level agreements, to include experience level agreements, looking at outcome and how people feel about their engagement with either the technology or the people behind the technology. So that's again, that's that human co-creational dimension that you see in high velocity IT alongside the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the SRE world, I don't know if we've talked about that, but has this idea of service level objectives, which is a little less formal and restrictive as what we think of contractual SLAs, of each team really, defining what they're trying to strive for the service that they're trying to deliver and the experience that people have. So another area, SRE, is a great.
Yeah, no, that's in there as well. SRE is certainly something that significantly contributes to more resilient operations, just like chaos engineering, another of the techniques that we reference. But speaking about agreements, certainly you should measure stuff. But the trouble is once you put something into an agreement between two parties, people start to game the system. I think it's Hawthorne's law. As soon as you make something explicit, intrinsic motivation evaporates. And yet you do have to agree something with other parties. So it's a delicate balance. What's going to work in this situation. Also looking at the relationship that you have with your customers and other stakeholders. So assessing what kind of relationship, what kind of agreements and measurements are appropriate for each particular situation.
I was thinking about too, when you mentioned resiliency, and previously you were talking about sort of the iterative nature, doing work on much smaller increments. It seems that also gives more flexibility for change. So that you may have a feature turned into a story that might be delivered over, multiple iterations in an agile process, and somewhere in that process you may have part of it released, but you may move on to other things or shift what you're actually doing. So it's a way of dealing with some of the dynamic, changing needs of the business.
Yeah, it's we reference 4 characteristics of the approaches that you'll find in these kind of organizations. We reference lean, agile, resilient, but also continuous. And I think that fits into this category. Things are changing all the time. So it's interesting when you got these traditional discussions between business people and IT people. You get IT people almost blaming business people for the fact that the world has changed. So it's the kind of the core values that you have, the belief system you have. If you have the belief system that things are changing all the time, and that's just part of life, that's a given, then you don't resist as much. We certainly trying to encourage people to embrace and enable change as well. We used to talk about change management, change control, which seems to be a bit defensive. Now it's just language, but even then, we like to talk about change enablement. How can you get changes done as quickly, as safely as possible?
Very interesting. Yeah, words do matter. What's the state of the community, the idle community, in the adoption of some of the principles around lean and agile and DevOps and SRE, and are most folks starting to become aware of, or are they educating, are they practicing? Where would you say we are in this journey?
Yeah, I forget who said it, but somebody said the future's already here. It's not just evenly distributed.
Yes, yeah.
So
it was Stephen Hawking or somebody.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Some people are doing it. I'm very pleased to see on LinkedIn or Twitter a response from an organization in the UK that says this high velocity IT stuff, this reflects the things that we are doing. This is a guy on the joint where DevOps and IT service management come together. That's his area of work. Mm-hmm. It'll depend on the kind of products and services that organizations provide. Are they digitally enabled? How digitally enabled are they? So it is very diverse. Lots of people for whom this is all pretty new. One of the objectives we have with the book is to familiarize people who know the old way of working, working in silos, that kind of stuff, and get them used to, make them more confident to engage in discussions with their DevOps, with their SRE colleagues about digital, to get the conversation going.
I think it seems like that's very important, because as things evolve, new things come into the picture, DevOps, et cetera, SRE. It's really easy to be sort of overwhelmed of, now what's that, and how is that different, and why should I care, or does it apply to me? So it seems that maybe taking that approach in this module of trying to bring that together from an idle perspective, from an operational perspective, makes maybe those topics a little more approachable, a little easier to consume and understand.
Yeah, and one of the things we advise people is to look at the 5 objectives that I mentioned, from valuable investments to assured conformance, and identify where their weakest link is in the organization or in their part of the organization. Because if you look at the theory of constraints, another body of knowledge that we reference, You should always be working on the weakest link. So that helps you to focus on a particular part. Don't be overwhelmed. You can't do all of this. You wouldn't want to do all of this at once. Pick your weakest link. Pick something that seems feasible, that you can, I could make an improvement there. And very much in the sentiment of continual improvement, because one of the DevOps tenets, the third way of DevOps is continuous learning and improving all the time. Little steps. I think that's the way we'd like to encourage people to go. Take it step by step, because after each step, you refer to the systemic nature of this kind of stuff. After each step, you've changed the system. So you've got to look around, see what's changed, and then plan the next step. So moving from what I call confirmatory ways of working in the high velocity IT book, when you've got predetermined plans and deadlines and milestones, because you can more or less predict what's going to happen. You confirm that during execution, you confirm that what you predicted and planned happened. So and we're used to that in IT service management, predetermined process. So moving from confirmatory ways of working to more exploratory ways of working, where you take things step by step. That's that evolutionary. As Dave Snowden, who some people will know from the Kinefin framework, says, Dave authored a great piece about ethics for the book, by the way, but his core area is, he's known from his complexity work. He says, you've got to move to the adjacent possible in an organization. So feel where the disposition of the organization is, in which direction are they moving naturally, and try and give them a nudge in that direction, zigzagging towards, whatever you want to achieve. That more again, that's that working in complex environments, reflecting respecting the unpredictable nature of the world we work in.
We're kind of borrowing from a lot of disciplines talking about this, and one that comes to mind, I believe it's quantum mechanics, that just observing something changes.
That's it. Yeah, the Heisenberg principle.
Heisenberg principle. Thank you.
Shine a light on it, and it's moved. You can either detect the velocity or the position, but not both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, this has been really fascinating.
I think Schrodinger's cat came into it as well, didn't he?
Very good. Well, I think what's fascinating about your work and the contributors' work on this is, I venture to guess there wasn't a lot of discussion about tools and technologies, because you're really thinking about the how of how we do work, how we work together, how this leads to the creation of software towards some co-created outcome.
It's very much the people dimension as well. You see that I mentioned ethics, for instance. Ethics. People want to do the right thing. That's an aspiration that people have. They want to trust and be trusted in the workplace. Psychological safety. I'm delighted that our industry is talking about this kind of stuff more often. Talking about things like, I remember at a conference, the good old days when we actually went to conferences. Conference in, I think it was New Zealand, in Wellington, where somebody was talking about social anxiety as a rather introvert engineer. And it's great because people empathize with that, and it's great. Trust and be trusted, fostering an environment where people can feel free to express themselves without fear for their position or reputation. If you build that kind of a foundation in your organization, all the tools will fit into place. It's about giving people the confidence to, and the privilege. Possibly a final thought: people just don't work in IT. Well, some people say it, but I'm sure some people don't just work in IT. They have the privilege of contributing to the well-being and prosperity of digital service consumers, right down at the end of the chain. And that I find that inspirational. Thinking, not just what happens in my silo, but at the end of the chain, you're changing somebody's world. And that's the kind of that's why I like to say about this book. It's is guidance that matters for people like us who care.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely inspiring to know that you're helping people, right, in the work that they do. So, Mark, Smalley, it's been fascinating talking with you. I applaud you on the approach you took on this. A lot of great concept that you've incorporated in the high velocity IT module, and I hope folks will check it out because I think there's some super valuable things. Again, changing the system is just by first observing it. And I think just reading the module, checking out parts of it would be a step in that direction. So appreciate your contribution. It's great been talking with you today.
My pleasure, Mitch. Thank you very much indeed.
You bet.
All right, up next we have double barrel Mike Vizard channel roundup. Mike's guests this week are from AppDynamics and Thousand Eyes, Joe Vicardo, head of product for Thousand Eyes, and Vipul Shah, chief product officer at AppDynamics, about how the two units, now both of Cisco, are taking observability to a higher level. And then Mike has another great interview with the folks at Portworx, where he's talking to Michael Ferranti, Vice President of Product and Corp Marketing at Portworx, about what makes data protection in Kubernetes environments different. Over to Mike Vizard.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Vipul Shah, who's the Chief Product Officer for AppDynamics, and Joe Vicardo, Head of Product for Thousand Eyes. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning.
All right, let's start with you, Vipul. Everywhere I turn around these days, somebody is talking about observability, and I scratch my head a little bit because I thought we were watching these systems all these years anyway, and maybe we had monitoring. So what exactly is the difference between what we're calling observability today and what we used to call monitoring yesterday?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So basically, the way I look at it, I mean, at the end of the day, observability is really the ability to, understand the state of the system based on the outputs, right? So the definition is very simple, but what's not really simple is, the systems have changed dramatically. I mean, first and foremost, a few years ago, many applications used to be, your 3-tier, many of them were kind of monolithic type of applications. You were able to really measure the internal state of the system, in a good way. It was very, very simple, right? A few processes and interdependencies. But really now the entire world has changed. First of all, you're talking about cloud. The cloud inherently is a much dynamic, much more composable and complex system in many ways, actually. And then on top of it, your applications, microservices. I mean, I talk with my customers and, people have 50 microservices, 100 microservices, lots of dependencies and concurrency, parallelism. It is not very easy to just say, hey, based on some simple outputs, I can measure the internal state of the system. And so observability is really about understanding the entire the depth of the system across the whole stack. And the word stack is very important because you're talking about end users, you're talking about potentially internet in the middle. Almost always there is internet in the middle. Then there are third-party services, then there are cloud services and microservices. You've got a completely distributed system. How are you going to measure that, right? And how are you going to understand the performance of the system? And more importantly, you might hear this word called, high cardinality. And essentially what it means is when there are hundreds and thousands of users, how do you identify a needle in a haystack, right? So that actually adds additional level of complexity. Anyway, so the observability is about measuring this whole distributed complex system in a very, especially when the data is very high cardinality data.
Yeah, that phrase high cardinality has a lot of implications outside the land of IT that maybe we just don't want to go there. But Joe, you guys just became part of Cisco and you're working with AppDynamics and Cisco at the core. And I guess we talk about applications all the time and we seem to focus on the quote unquote software, but it seems to me the laws of physics have not been suspended in the age of the cloud. And everybody has a different application experience depending on where they are. Do you think people are starting to think about observability in the context of networking and applications? And if so, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And first off, it's been a great first 3 months being part of Cisco and kind of joining the team. I think our visions for what we want to deliver across Cisco are just so well aligned with what Thousand Eyes is trying to deliver. Within Thousand Eyes, right, we believe that the that the cloud is the new data center, that the internet is the new enterprise network, and that SaaS applications are the new application stack. And that kind of goes to what you just talked about. When you think about those three fundamental truths, what's common about all three of them is that businesses rely upon them, but they don't own them. And if you don't own them, you're not able to then observe them in the same ways that you would a traditional network. And if you think about then how that digital experience is applied across the landscape today, with the rise of work from home, where every individual user, in essence, is operating on their own corporate network, that digital supply chain between the user and the application is now getting increasingly complex. With the rise of, say, SD-WAN to be able to optimize the corporate network, the rise of, say, network services to bring different networking functions outside of the data center to be able to optimize the network path, optimize in specific cloud on-ramp solutions to be able to deliver a better experience for specific application stacks, and then ultimately landing on the application where those applications now are more distributed and built in a microservices-based architecture. What's true, right, is that as the supply chain gets more and more complex, more and more things can break down that can impact the ultimate experience that one user has. And so for Thousand Eyes, right, our ultimate goal is to deliver that end-to-end visibility that can be used to be able to observe your overall experience, and then to provide that level of common operating language so that we can be able to bring the visibility, the intelligence, and actions from the network perspective, and then tie that together seamlessly within the application layer as well as within the infrastructure layer. And that then aligns with what that vision that Vipul mentioned around that kind of full stack observability.
When I think about this, I think a lot of people used Thousand Eyes when they had applications that were being accessed by external users, maybe customers, digital vendors, e-commerce, whatever else. But with this shift towards working from home for employees, do you think that there's more interest in what's going on across the extended network for applications that are now being accessed from home? And it looks like that's going to be the case for a long time to come. So are you seeing people have a different conversation about their enterprise applications than they may have had about their web applications in the past?
Yeah, absolutely, right. People think about the visibility from three different lenses, right? There's the visibility from the outside in. What is the visibility of my customers experiencing the front door of my business? And as business goes through that digital transformation, the experience your customers are getting from that digital footprint is more and more important. But as you mentioned, with that rise of, say, SaaS applications, the experience from an employee perspective, then paired with the rise of, say, moving out of the office and into a home network, you need to ensure that your employees are productive. And that productivity is directly correlated to the experience they get accessing those critical applications that they need to be able to get their jobs done. And so many different parts of that supply chain can break down, right? Their home Wi-Fi can break down. Their home ISP their local ISP can break down. The network services that are fronting or proxying their traffic can break down. And ultimately, then the application can break down. And then by bringing together within Cisco, both App Dynamics to be able to understand the experience for the applications you own, with Thousand Eyes giving you that full path visualization, you can truly see that end-to-end visibility, no matter if it's an application you own or not, and no matter if it's a network you own or not.
But Paul, walk me through a little bit about how, as a DevOps team, I might experience or see all this. Because on the one hand, you've got Joe and Thousand Eyes, and then you've got Cisco has a bunch of analytics tools for the infrastructure and the networking. So if I'm sitting here working within the App Dynamics, I guess we're still calling it an APM platform, or I don't know exactly what we're calling it these days, but how does that look to me, and what value do I get out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, by the way, we recently announced the release of our observability platform, right? And along with that, we also announced, the visualization, for the cloud native workloads, cloud data collector, and all of that, right? So I'll mention, within that context. So the thing is, from a DevOps standpoint, so first and foremost, we take the word observability very seriously, right? As Joe also talked about how everything is all interconnected, including the end user experience, and the end user could be either an employee or a real, customer, right? So in either case, we want to measure, their experience, and then internet is in the middle of everything. So from our standpoint, now your question was really about a DevOps user. So first and foremost, when a DevOps person is deploying an application internally, they are trying to do a deployment. This could be for a release, internal test, pre-production deployment or a production deployment. What they're trying to do is they're trying to measure the overall end user impact during, before and after all the different releases are deployed. So from an end user standpoint, I mean, what we do is we basically help our users compare different releases of their applications. And it's not just the whole application. Customers may release individual services. So a DevOps owner may just own a certain set of services that they want to release. They're not releasing. This is not a monolith world where you release the entire application in one shot, right? So the point is, whatever it is that they own, that they're releasing across multiple stages and environments, test and production and all of those in the middle, they're able to compare. Number one, what's the overall performance, what is the end user impact of these releases, and then more importantly, if they see that there is an anomaly, like if they see that there is something somewhere, there is a deterioration of an experience, they're able to then go into the detail. Essentially, what they want to be able to do is do a root cause analysis. But as I mentioned earlier, in a complex distributed application, a distributed cloud environment, that is a much difficult proposition. And so essentially what they would be able to do through App Dynamics and Thousand Eyes and the rest of the Cisco tooling is to be able to achieve that whole full stack observability, including the root cause analysis.
One of the things I hear a lot about these days is distributed tracing, and it seems to have a lot of context around microservices and cloud native and containers. And yet I feel like we've been talking about distributed tracing as a capability for a while now. So what do you see that's changing in terms of when do I use distributed tracing? I've got metrics, I've got logs, I've got sampling. So how does this all come together in some kind of way that's consumable or actionable?
Yeah, in fact, so distributed tracing now, actually, it's all part of the open telemetry standard, which is evolving, right? And overall, Cisco is a participant in the cloud native, the foundation, which open telemetry is part of that, right? So basically, what we are doing is we are working towards the number of initiatives. First thing is basically contributing, wherever possible, so that we can further the standard. And also what we're trying to do is essentially adopt the standard. So again, within, not just within the App Dynamics portfolio, but, making sure that our customers are able to benefit from, if they are adopting distributed tracing. So your question was about distributed tracing and how customers are benefiting, right? I mean, from our viewpoint, we tell our customers, they should adopt, whatever works for them. So for example, there are a bunch of new and emerging frameworks. I'm talking about application frameworks where where distributed tracing is enabled, or it is very it's those frameworks are built with distributed tracing in mind, right? So if customers are building their microservice application using those frameworks, yes, they can take the benefit of distributed tracing. It will collect metrics. It will also collect traces. And then what you would also have is, however, you would also need to enhance those metrics and traces with data collected from cloud provider, right? So if you're using, for example, any public cloud provider, they provide you with services that gives you metrics that are specific to that cloud provider, those services. So you need to integrate this data, the metric data, along with that data coming from cloud provider. you would have other applications where it may not be enabled for tracing because you need to instrument your code in order to enable distributed tracing, and many applications don't do that, right? So then in that case, you can use App Dynamics agents to collect data from there. The point is you can collect data from all these variety of sources, and our observability platform is going to correlate all of these things together once the data comes to the platform, and then present the combined analysis and combined information to the user, to the developer in this case.
Quick follow on that. Is it getting easier to instrument my application? I feel like sometimes when I talk to people, they're like, managing the agents is as hard as the software itself, and it's a DevOps motion in its own. So is that going to get better, easier, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so managing the agents is definitely getting much simpler because a lot of the DevOps practices are all about shifting left. So you basically instrument everything right while you are developing your code, and while you are developing your binaries, at the very early stage of the build and development process, right? And then also, wherever possible, especially when there are new language frameworks, people are able to enable distributed tracing there as well. And so I think all of these practices are getting much simpler. Especially with DevOps, people are used to these terms, monitoring as code, infrastructure as code. To me, these are all different ways to describe shifting left. So you can instrument your agent, you can configure your agent, and then you can actually collect the right set of metrics and traces. And then basically the observability platform is going to correlate all this.
Joe, let me ask you, a lot of this stuff is heading out to the edge, and of course the edge is open to interpretation, but do you think that developers will find it a lot more challenging to build these highly distributed applications that are going further out to the edge, and there's different definitions of the edge? So how will monitoring and observability change as we start to push more workloads out to these edge computing platforms?
It's a really interesting trend, right? When you think about edge computing and putting specific functions closer to say where the data is provided. I think one of the important things that application and really infrastructure developers need to consider is that by the benefits of moving things to the edge come with also the increased need to be able to understand the performance across this distributed system. And that distributed system is going to be interconnected through now likely a network that is made up of devices you own as well as devices that you do not own. And so you need to be able to not only discover the topology of your application and be able to then place the key points of presence to be able to gain the vantage point, be able to monitor the systems across that highly distributed mesh-based architecture, and be able to then understand when going through that approach that now you're taking potentially a dependency on networks that are outside of your own control. And therefore, you need to be able to take a different approach to how do you gain that level of visibility to be able to understand the performance across those different new points of presence. How do you then take that visibility and turn it into intelligence? Because you're going to be getting a tremendous amount of data within that observability stack. You need to be able to turn that data into intelligence. And then ultimately, you need to be able to act on it. Because as these applications get more and more distributed and pushing those functions to the edge, a single issue across that architecture can have a long-ranging and ripple effect in terms of the overall experience for the end users that are accessing that application. And so you need to be able to, again, take that provide visibility where it matters, be able to turn that data into intelligence, and then to be able to act on that data and to collaborate both within your overall functions as well as outside into the people that are managing the networks that are outside of your own control.
Do you think, Joe, that the DevOps teams and the network operations teams are going to come together to make that happen? It seems like, to your point, a lot of these things are outside the control of the developers. So how do we kind of get everybody aligned, or what are you seeing people try to do?
Yeah, there's a really interesting trend, right? When you think about, first off, the functions, within an IT organization, say at the end user support layer, the infrastructure layer, the network layer, and then the application layer that are still, I think at times struggling to be able to work collaboratively together. And each of them bring a different lens into the infrastructure. And what's really needed is, a set of capabilities that can provide that common operating language across the different functions, and so that an application team and a network team can see side to side and understand each other in what is necessary, not only to deliver a great application experience, a great network experience, but how those two different systems come together to deliver a great digital experience. But then, as you mentioned, the interoperability is not only within the IT organization now, it's also between the enterprise and the cloud providers, as well as the enterprise and the SaaS providers, and then between the SaaS providers and the cloud providers where those SaaS applications are running upon. And so again, they also need that level of a common operating language, a common set of data and metrics and visibility that they can be able to share amongst each other. Because ultimately, what we find is many times you will have SaaS application providers, infrastructure providers, and enterprise IT all working together to be able to solve the challenge, to be able to understand what's happening across that complex digital supply chain. As you mentioned, as those applications become more modular and distributed, as functions move from inside of the data center out to the edge, and as you adopt a more complex digital supply chain, that need of providing a common operating language becomes just more and more critical to be able to ensure you're delivering the right experience to the users.
But Paul, this could be my bias, but at least in my experience, people only really used APM for their most critical monolithic applications because it was expensive for them to go do. And yet, as we move to microservices, we have all these dependencies. It seems like I absolutely have to have some kind of observability capability just to survive. So do you think that this whole shift to microservices is going to increase consumption of some type of observability platform and drive more people toward DevOps as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, the word APM, has evolved, right? I mean, that's my viewpoint. So it has evolved with the evolution of applications. I mean, exactly to your point, there were traditional applications. They were, traditional now, not back then. And now we have very distributed microservices applications. The applications have evolved. And from my viewpoint, APM has evolved with it. The important difference is, though, APM, at least from an app dynamic standpoint, we're not just an APM vendor anymore. Our goal, our vision is beyond APM, right? And actually, exactly why we have great integration with 1,000 eyes is exactly to that point, which is more so in microservices world, again, not just dependencies between microservices, but even if you look at serverless computing, right, it's all very event driven, and everything sits on a cloud. So there are cloud services that that we need to think about. We cannot think about just application and no cloud in the middle. I mean, you have to think about that. You have to think about internet in the middle, because at the end of the day, there's end user, whether an employee or a real user, right? So the full stack, full correlation, and is really what we are aiming for, right? So my point is, the word APM has evolved, and especially when it comes to app dynamics, we really care more about the full stack observability. And you're right, the observability platforms will gain more and more traction, because the new platforms need to really cater to the new complex distributed applications and the infrastructure.
All right, guys, it's all about observability and context. I want to thank our guests for being on the show.
Great, thanks for having us.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, appreciate that.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind Devops.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Michael Ferrenti, Vice President of Product and Corporate Marketing for Portworx. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
All right, KubeCon is this week, and of course, everybody's got something going on, including you guys. You guys are talking about some updates to the backup capabilities you provide as part of your storage software for Kubernetes. Walk us through what's going on here.
Yeah, so we have been kind of making a lot of updates to our backup product line as customers have adopted it over the last year. I think clearly Kubernetes is more popular than ever, and with that popularity comes increasing numbers of applications that are running in production and are kind of not just side projects or what we used to call low-hanging fruit within the corporate data center, but truly mission-critical applications. And so those apps need to be protected, they need to be secure, and so our customers are no exception to that. Against the backdrop of these updates, what I'll talk about in just a second, GigaOM recently, really just last week, put out what they call their radar report for Kubernetes data protection. And Portworx was really proud to be a leader in that report. And kind of that leadership has led us to make some updates to our platform to increase the number of people that can use it, and also make Portworx just an easier company to do business with. So let me dive in. So the first thing is PX Backup, our standalone backup service for Kubernetes applications, now can run on any storage system that supports the CSI interface. CSI is the container storage interface. It's the Kubernetes standard for connecting storage systems to the Kubernetes control plane. Previously, a customer who is not using Portworx's own software-defined storage layer could run PX Backup natively on top of cloud storage. So right, Amazon, Google, Azure, as well as VMware. But if you had, say, an EMC array or a Pure Storage array, for instance, now that we've been acquired by Pure Storage, you couldn't use PX Backup natively. Now, by supporting the CSI interface, even if you're not running the Portworx software-defined storage layer on top of, say, a Pure Storage flash array or that Dell EMC or that NetApp storage system, you can still use PX Backup to capture your entire application, including data and application configuration. So it really makes PX Backup ubiquitous in terms of the environments that it can support. So that's one. The second point is, customers want, any enterprise software today, they want a free trial and they want to be at a pay-as-you-go, right? That's becoming table stakes. And we've offered pay-as-you-go pricing now for a while with our Portworx Enterprise solution. Now we're extending that to also be PX Backup. So for 20 cents per node per hour, you can get started. Very low barrier to entry with PX Backup, and you can simply pay as you grow.
What is different about backup in Kubernetes environments versus what people historically have known on legacy platforms? What do they have to do differently or think differently about?
Yeah, great question. Kubernetes kind of breaks this traditional application model where an application would run on a single server. Virtualization came about because we had this entire physical server and we were only running one application, and that seemed really wasteful. So we virtualized it. So now we had kind of 10 applications running per server, but each was in a VM. And so if we were to back up or we would protect or we would secure and encrypt that VM, by extension, we were also doing that for our application. With Kubernetes, a typical application is made up of dozens or hundreds of containers and pods. Those containers and pods are spread across a cluster of servers. And so there's no kind of machine granular operation in terms of a backup or migration or encryption that we can do to protect the entire application. To back up a Kubernetes app, you need to understand where all those containers and pods are living in that cluster, and then what volumes they may be using, and then what application configuration is necessary in order for them to all talk to each other. What secrets or what keys do I need to enable communication internode? What policies do I have? What deployment manifests? all of that configuration is a critical part of your Kubernetes application. So what PX Backup does is when we capture an application, we're capturing the data, which is clearly important if it's a database, but also all of the choice. And then when you go to recover it, you're recovering all of that metadata and data into your new environment. So it speeds up your recovery time and also ensures that you don't get these kind of, environmental differences where you have one part of your application, but you don't have some other piece of configuration in the new environment. And so you can't start it up.
You guys were early on this whole Kubernetes storage transition. A lot of people were running stateless apps forever, and now it feels like everybody's finally getting on the stateful bandwagon. It may have taken longer than we thought, but what is your sense of the current state of Kubernetes environments in terms of running applications that require persistent storage and databases? What are we seeing?
It's here, it's now. I don't think, there's many other ways to say it. I saw some numbers come out of 451 in their last Voice of the Enterprise survey, where over half of containers that were included in the survey had some type of state attached to them. And I think it only makes sense because, what enterprise application doesn't have data, right? It's very, very few. We can have individual microservices that don't have data. But if we're containerizing applications and we're putting applications onto Kubernetes, then data is just part and parcel of that. So I think I used the term low-hanging fruit before. I think as enterprise teams thought about how do we start to learn Kubernetes, they picked off some of those small microservices that were stateless, so that they could get comfortable operating. How do I, package something for Kubernetes? How do I manage my deployments? How do I monitor? They did that with those low-hanging fruits. But now that containerization and the automation that Kubernetes provides has proved so valuable, right? The low-hanging fruit is, right, that's all been picked. Now we're saying, what are the most important business problems that we can solve using Kubernetes? And let's run that. And those applications always have data. We've seen this multiple times with our customers over the last, 9-month period, kind of this age of COVID, where they're seeing massive increases in online demand for their services. And they're starting to use Kubernetes to build and scale those services, not simply the quote unquote low hanging fruit.
Even all those stateless apps eventually store data somewhere. So somebody is storing data somehow or in some fashion. How is managing storage itself and data different in Kubernetes environments? Does it scale out more often, scale up? What is fundamentally different on that side?
A couple of things. One is there's kind of scale in two directions. So one is just density. In a typical VM environment, any physical server is going to be running, a dozen VMs, something like that. It can be, that number can be a little bit higher, it can be a little bit lower, but we're talking, you're right, 10 dozen, 15, something like that. Within a containerized environment, especially in a bare metal environment, you could be running, hundreds or even, we have some customers that are running over 1,000 containers per virtual machine. So it's an order of magnitude increase in density on each host. So that's basically a kind of a radical multi-tenant environment in each host that you have to manage. The second would be an increase in the number of operations per hour. So in that typical VM environment, it tended to move as fast as an administrator could move. So you had a storage administrator, you had a VM administrator, and that person was responsible for kind of scaling, as you said, adding additional capacity, maybe doing migrations. This was the age of the maintenance notification, right? So we would send out a note to our users saying, hey, the environment's going to be unavailable for the next, maybe 2 days. You get it on that, can't access it from 5 p.m. on a Friday until 8 a.m. on a Monday while we do this migration. You probably noticed in the services that you use, consumer and enterprise, that those maintenance notifications are fewer and fewer. That's because we're always updating our applications. There's always some new service that's being put into production. And that level of change and churn is, again, an order of magnitude greater than Kubernetes. And because it's individual development teams who are pushing those changes, you need the ability from a self-service perspective to do the operational verbs. So to back up, to migrate, to recover, to encrypt. It needs to be an individual development team or a DevOps team that can take those actions, because they are ultimately the ones that are responsible for that app. You go back to, on this server, I've got 100 different containers or 100 different applications, right? An administrator, a storage administrator, a VM administrator can't keep up with the requirements of that many applications, the life cycle of that many applications. And so Kubernetes introduces automation and self-service to enable us to operate highly dense clusters that are changing on an hourly basis.
How is the merger with Pure Storage going? What are the synergies? What have you guys seen so far? What have their reaction been?
Yeah, so it's been really, really positive. I think, culturally, we called ourselves port workers, and now we call ourselves Puritans. And there's really been a great seamless transition from a culture perspective. Both companies are just obsessed by customer success. Pure Storage has kind of best-in-class NPS ratings, and Portworx has always been obsessed with doing what's right for the customer and making them successful. We're also both obsessed with providing the best technology solution, right? And how you win in the market is by being customer focused and having the best technology solution. So that's been fantastic. One of the motivations for the acquisition was actually some of Pure Storage's largest customers were also Portworx's largest customers. So in this period, we're speaking with those customers, we're understanding what the value is, what the synergy is, and we're putting together a roadmap for how do we enable those customers to still get the most out of Pure Storage, but also take advantage of all of the capabilities that Portworx provides. So hopefully we'll be sharing more on an updated integration in kind of the coming days and weeks. But so far, all signs are very, very positive.
Everybody talks a lot about hybrid clouds, and generally will point to Kubernetes as one of the means for making that happen. I feel though the data conversation side of that gets overlooked and is more complicated than people appreciate. So what has to happen with data and storage management to realize this hybrid cloud dream that we're all having?
Yeah, I'm not wearing it today. I usually am wearing it, but it's my favorite Portworx t-shirt. And it's an astronaut floating through space with the words underneath, defeat data gravity. I think that is kind of the thing that hybrid cloud really needs to tackle, which is that data does have gravity, it has mass, applications tend to congregate where data is. And so you need a flexible way to move data, to understand what data is where, who has access to it, right? There's compliance and control concerns associated with that. And you need the ability to sometimes not move all your data, but subsets of data. So you could think about this in terms of edge computing, IoT, where you're collecting data at the edge, you're moving it to, maybe you're doing some initial processing, and then you're maybe taking a subset of that data and putting it into the core data center for training your machine learning algorithms, right? So there's this idea that data needs to be able to move, but also not one in which we're going to be taking petabytes of data and moving it, every day between, this cloud and that cloud, or on-prem and cloud. It takes a more nuanced view of it. And that's what we've tried to do with Portworx and solutions like PX Motion, which can be used to move data, subsets of data, maybe as you're training your algorithms, and you parse some data, you extract what you need to be to train your algorithm, and you put that into another environment. That's a real world use case for hybrid cloud. And then different apps run in different clouds. Sometimes hybrid cloud might actually not mean that a single application is running in two environments, but that I have some apps that run in one environment. Maybe I have an app that really requires a great DNS lookup service, and that's what I get from Google. But I have another application that might want to take advantage of a service that Amazon has for natural language processing. So for me, a hybrid cloud environment is actually running some apps or some components of apps in one cloud and others in another cloud. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
All right. Who's in charge of this? It used to be there was a storage administrator somewhere in all these legacy environments. Nowadays, it's DevOps teams. What's the mix? Who's making the big call?
That's a good question. I don't think there's one answer. It depends on the organization. It depends in some cases the application. And I think kind of over the next 3 to 4 years, I think we are going to see some consolidation and more of a, I don't think there's only going to be one solution, right? There's not only one solution today for how you operate your cloud environment or for your on-prem environment. But I do think we're going to see some more standardization. I think central IT is going to have to own this. And, the DevOps teams that are responsible for individual applications increasingly will be part of central IT. Now, that doesn't mean that all decision-making is going to be centralized, right? Because what we've kind of said in the earlier part of the segment is that, there's too many applications. It's too complex. Things are moving too quickly for kind of, centralized decision-making where you have to file a ticket in order to get additional resources, and that needs to be approved. So I think there's going to be a combination of leveraging the automation that Kubernetes provides, for one. 2, responsibility for individual application outcomes, right? Availability, security, compliance with any, backup and recovery mandates, SLAs at the individual DevOps team. But then rolling up into perhaps a CIO kind of overall board level objectives for how are we doing in, our application delivery, cadence? Are we, not getting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal for data breaches, right? Are we able to, get to market as quickly as we can? What are our revenue numbers? I think those things are increasingly going to be owned at the high level, with responsibility for implementing cascaded down within the organization.
Hey, Michael, thanks for being on the show today.
Happy to be here.
All right, guys, throwing it back to you in the studio. Take care.
Hey, Mike, thanks very much. 2 great interviews there. Guys, that's going to wrap another great episode of TechStrong TV. We'll be back Thursday with fresh content. We'll be replaying a vintage episode tomorrow. Until then, though, guys, do be careful out there. The COVID numbers around the world are rising, and especially here in the U.S. So be careful, be safe, be well, be strong, TechStrong. See you Thursday.